All right, everybody, welcome to the Central Committee stream with your host, Mike from PA. We are live once again. It is January 14th, 2025. 6 days from the swearing in of Donald J. Trump for his second term. It's unbelievable. Why is well, I don't know, you can come back, like, I don't know, tomorrow. You can check tomorrow. The LA firefighter story with Hassan it's really exciting because it is Hassan being rewarded for being a good guy and caring about people that should be national heroes. And it's fucking embarrassing that Hassanabi, a Twitch streamer, is the one doing journalism. Are we gonna watch Hegseth? Yeah, I mean, if you want, we could watch some Hegseth.
In the 2025 NDAA, it was established to a new position, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear Deterrence, Chemical and Biological Defense Policy and Programs. And that was established so we could cut through a lot of the bureaucratic stovepipes that we see in the office of the Secretary of Defense. If confirmed, will you direct the Department of Defense components to expeditiously implement this reform?
It sounds great. I would want to look directly at exactly what that reform is.
It is
I
great.
take your word that it's great, Senator. I will review it robustly, and I look forward to implementing it.
Okay, thank you. During the first Trump administration, the 2018 nuclear posture
he doesn't know anything. Can you imagine going in to a Senate confirmation hearing and just having, I mean, being a dumb fuck is now the strat. Like, this is now the strat. The strat is people have been trained that they don't need to know anything, right? So if they don't know it, then it's not a big deal if you don't know it. This is now the narcissistic, solipsistic way that people approach expertise. It's like if I went to a doctor and they're like, ooh, you know, I don't know a lot about skin, but let me take a look at that. I would be like, maybe you should refer me to a doctor who does know about skin instead of trying to do diagnoses from Google, you fucking worthless sack of shit. So now we officially have politicians that no longer expected to know anything, and they just, you know, well, I guess if I don't know it, then the politician and bureaucrat doesn't have to know it either. They're on my team. That's all I need to know.
You concluded that the U.S. needed to once again develop and deploy a nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile known as SLICM to offset significant Russian and Chinese advantages in theater-range nuclear capabilities. Since then, Congress, on a strong bipartisan basis, has directed the Navy and the National Nuclear Security Administration to continue this effort. Do you support the SLICM program?
As of right now, Senator, based on what I know, I do. But one of my answers I'll have repeatedly throughout this morning is getting an opportunity to look under the hood, classified material, get an understanding of true capabilities vis-a-vis enemy capabilities. Because what we know right now on the nuclear, Senator, what I know on the nuclear side is that Russia and China are rushing to modernize and build arsenals larger than ours. We need to match threats to capabilities, and the systems we elevate will be tied to whether those capabilities are needed.
Okay, so every single dollar that is spent on a theater range nuclear missile is wasted. A theater range nuclear missile basically comes across from the belief that we'll be able to do limited exchanges of nuclear weapons. It creates an incentive structure for the deployment of nuclear weapons. It moves nuclear weapons into theater commanders' hands and away from central commands like the president and the national strategic authorities, right? It is a disastrous, warmongering, incredibly dangerous program that has no efficacy. And so every dollar spent on it moves us closer to nuclear war, imperils the world, and wastes billions of dollars. An absolutely insane program that only the most bloodthirsty and, quite frankly, moronic person would support. Unbelievable. I mean, of course, it's Republicans. Of course. Can I spend billions of dollars on worthless weapons? Yes, please, sir. Please.
And the adversaries we face.
Would you ensure that this program is executed according to law?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Senator.
What, short here, what is your plan to revitalize the industrial base in this country?
Needs to be real short.
Real short.
Serious investment targeted at systems that we truly need by also incentivizing competition and laser focus from the OSD, from the Office of Secretary of Defense, to all the particular strategic initiatives to revive them so it's not just one system, it's multiple systems.
You may want to expand on that on the.
By the way, chat. This is how capitalism actually works, right? If you want to become a billionaire, if you legitimately do want to become a billionaire, and you're listening to my stream, I'll tell you the secret. The secret to becoming a billionaire is spending your early 20s in CIA. So in college, try to get yourself recruited into CIA. I would look for some sort of electrical engineering, but it doesn't even really matter. You can major in fucking basket weaving, all right? It doesn't matter. Get into CIA, spend about 4 to 5 years in CIA, and then jump out with some of the connections you've made, you know, some of the like money that's been printed off book and the CIA's printing press. Go ahead and take, you know, 10 of that $1 million of dark money that they just print at CIA and shift it over into a fucking duffel bag. No one will notice. Now you have your seed money and you look for something that some government contract. All right. You're looking for some government contract, and thus you get yourself a nice incestuous contract. You open it in bumblefuck Nebraska, and then Senator Fisher will shovel billions of dollars towards you for the rest of your fucking life. It doesn't matter how competent you are. It doesn't matter if the thing fucking works. Just, you know, drop $10,000 into her campaign account and you're good. That is how people really make money in America. It's not innovation or any of this other dumbass motherfucking shit. It is figuring out ways of creating flows of money from the government.
Record. At this point, my colleagues, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter organized by a group called Flag Officers for America, which
Flag
has
Officers for
120 retired generals and admirals offering their support for Mr. Hegseth's nomination. I ask unanimous consent. Without objection, it is entered into the record.
We should find out who's in that group
Senator
and
Shaheen.
deal with that.
Good morning, Mr. Hegseth.
Good morning, Senator.
I was pleased when I was contacted on your behalf about meeting before this hearing. I've been on this committee since 2011, and during that time, I voted to confirm 6 nominees to be Secretary of Defense from 3 administrations, 2 Democratic and 1 Republican, the first Trump administration. Every one of those nominees met with me and my Democratic colleagues on this committee before the hearing. So as you can imagine, I was disappointed when no one ever followed up. When we followed up with your office, you were not able to meet. Do you understand that if you're confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, that you will have a responsibility to meet with all members of this committee, not just Republicans?
Senator, I very much appreciate and understand the traditionally bipartisan nature of this committee. Their national defense is not partisan. It should not be about Republicans or Democrats. And so I look forward to working together with you and your colleagues on.
So it's very important to understand that the Democrats are going to fold, all right? Because these kind of grifters from Fox News are not a threat to the military-industrial complex. They're just grifters who want access to the real money and power. And this is what people are bitter about on the center left, okay? I want to explain it to you guys so you understand what's really going on and you're not confused when the Democrats vote for this guy. All right. What is going on here is the people on the center left believe that you should only be able to be Secretary of Defense if you proceed through the what they consider to be meritocratic programs of, you know, going to an Ivy League university, coming from a prep school, coming from wealth, you know, family that was flag officers or higher in the military, You work your way through working in both Republican and Democratic political offices. You come from the military industrial complex itself, come from the upper class. What they're mad about Pete Hegseth for doing, which is he went on Fox News and rabble-roused in front of the proles and got famous, and he doesn't have the CV. He doesn't have the resume. He was only a major, right, in the military. He doesn't really have the connections to true intergenerational capitalist wealth. He didn't go to a prep school. He didn't go to an Ivy League school. He's not involved with the CIA, as far as I know. So they're bitter that he didn't follow the path that you're supposed to follow if you're a person of means, right? He's a nouveau riche rabble rouser. He shouldn't be here, right? The Secretary of Defense is a serious position. That's a position that you make hundreds of millions of dollars from when you leave it. Like this is like, I mean, you're going to be on Raytheon's, board of directors. You're going to be on Lockheed Martin's board of directors. You're going to be on SpaceX board of directors. You're going to be on 8 different board of directors. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of profit that Pete Hegseth will personally make if he becomes DOD. Okay, like this is one of the most primo fucking jobs you can ever get. Arguably more enriching than president. All right. That's what the Democrats are bitter about. All right. They want it to come from a certain class of person. Oh, he was on Princeton. Okay. Well, there you go. Well, but here's the thing. He may have even gone to an Ivy. He may even be a rich kid. But the point is he's here because he was a rabble rouser on Fox News. And that's what they object to. But don't worry. They're going to vote for him. Because, guys, you wouldn't want to show dissension for our adversaries.
Priorities facing this nation, yes.
I think we would expect that. And one reason that I wanted to
Disturbing retired brass spread election lie and attack on Biden Democrats. Under a Democrat Congress and current administration, our country has taken a hard left turn towards socialism and a Marxist form of tyrannical government. A Marxist form of tyrannical government.
to meet with you was because I thought it would be really helpful to better understand your views on women in the military. Because you've made a number of surprising statements about women serving in the military. As recently as November the 7th of 2024 on the Sean Ryan Show, you said, and I quote, "I'm straight up saying that we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective." The quote went on a little longer, but that was the gist of it. That was before you were nominated to be Secretary of Defense. Mr. Hegseth, do you know what percentage of our military is comprised of women?
I believe it's 18 to 20%, Senator.
It's almost 18%, and in fact, DOD's 2023 demographic report indicated that there are more women serving now, and there are fewer separations. So they make up a critical part of our military, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, ma'am. Women in our military, as I have said publicly, have and continue to make amazing contributions across all aspects of our battlefield.
Well, you also write in your book, The War on Warriors, with the chapter, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, that, quote, "Not only are women comparatively less effective than men in combat roles, but they are more likely to be objectified by the enemy and their own nation in the moral realms of war." Mr. Hegseth, should we take it to believe that you believe that the two women on this committee who have served honorably and with distinction made our military less effective and less capable?
I'm incredibly grateful for the two women who've served our military in uniform and including in the Central Intelligence Agency, contributions on the battlefield, indispensable contributions. Senator, I would like to clarify, when I'm talking about that issue, it's not about the capabilities of men and women, it's about standards. And this committee has talked a lot about standards. Standards that we, unfortunately, over time, have seen eroded in certain duty positions, certain schools, certain places, which affects readiness, which is what I care about the most, readiness on the battlefield.
I appreciate that.
And so my comments point time and time again to standards.
Statements publicly have not been to that effect. After your nomination, you did state to a group of reporters that you, quote, "support all women serving in our military today who do a fantastic job across the globe, including combat." So what I'm confused about, Mr. Hegseth, is which is it? Why should women in our military, if you were the Secretary of Defense, believe that they would have a fair shot and an equal opportunity to rise through the ranks. If on the one hand, you say that women are not competent, they make our military less effective, and on the other hand, you say, oh no, now that I've been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, I've changed my view on women in the military. What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose. Our differences are not what define us. Our unity and our shared purpose is what define us, and you will be treated fairly and with dignity, honor, and respect, just like every man and woman in uniform, just like the men and women that I've worked with in my veterans organizations, to include when I was a headquarters and headquarters company commander in the Minnesota National Guard.
Well, I
we had women in
appreciate
our
your
ranks as
11th
well.
hour conversion, but Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would like to submit Chapter 5, the deadly obsession with women warriors, for the record. Mr. Hegseth.
But without
Well, now, do you see how, by the way, do you see how Hegseth is just completely surrendering all his former hog positions? Because to him, you have to understand what I'm saying. When you see Department of Defense, that's not what you should see. You should see generational wealth. You should see becoming permanently one of the most influential people behind the scenes for the next 40 years. All right? Like, being a department, like a DOD secretary, is like solid fucking gold. Most people, quite frankly, who are in this position would say literally anything to become Department of Defense secretary. So he'll say whatever the fuck he needs to say to get across the line. He doesn't believe in anything right now, okay? He believes on whatever he needs to get 51 senators.
objection will be.
I just read All the Shah's Men. Great book. Thanks for your recommendation. Yeah, it's a good one. If you want to understand what America did to Iran, destroying the fucking Middle East.
Submitted.
Are you familiar with the Women, Peace, and Security agenda at the Department of Defense?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
This is a law that was signed during President-elect Trump's first term. It was legislation that I sponsored with Republican Senator Capito of West Virginia.
Oh, bipartisan.
It was co-sponsored by Marco Rubio, the nominee to be the President-elect's Secretary of State. It was led in the House of
What's up,
Representatives
Denims?
by
Denims
Kristi
was in here.
Noem,
I
the
didn't even say
President-elect's
hi. What a
nominee to be
dick.
the Secretary of Homeland Security.
What a dick I
It
am.
mandates that women be included in all aspects of our national security, including conflict resolution and peace negotiations. And at the Department of Defense, it has been the law for 8 years under both the Trump and Biden administrations. The DoD has incorporated women throughout its decision-making as a result. Every single combatant commander across 2 administrations has told this committee that this law and its implementation at the Department of Defense provides them a strategic advantage operationally. Based on your comments, it appears that the example that you would like to set, not only for women in this country, but for women across the globe, 50% of the world's population, as the prospective nominee to lead the most combat-credible military in the entire world, is that women should not have an equal opportunity in our military. So will you commit to preserving the Women, Peace, and Security law at DoD and including in your budget the requisite funding to continue to restore and resource these programs throughout the DoD?
Senator, I will commit to reviewing that program and ensuring it aligns with America First national security priorities, meritocracy, lethality, and readiness. And if it advances American interests, it's something we would advance. If it doesn't, it's something we would look at.
Since former President Trump signed the law, I hope that he agrees with you.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. At this point, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 5 letters of support from female service members and combat veterans who support Mr. Hegseth's nomination. These
That's
women
it?
represent diverse
5?
viewpoints, from a retired colonel with over 25 years of service to an active duty Navy surface warfare commander to a senior airman. They support Mr. Hegseth and comment on his focus on merit, warfighting readiness, military training status, and the warrior ethos. So without objection, it will be entered into the record. And now I'm honored to Recognize Senator Cotton for 7 minutes.
Mr. Hegseth, let's continue on this line of questioning about what's sometimes referred to as women in combat. I think that phrase is something of a misnomer. Many members of this committee have served in combat in the last 25 years, to include women and men. I'm sure all those men served with women, whether they were military police officers or they were pilots or whether they were intelligence analysts or medics or what have you. You served. I assume you served with women who were on the front lines as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And were those women anything other than skilled, brave, and honorable in their service?
They were some of the best soldiers I worked with.
So women have been
Well, okay, so here's the thing that's really funny about this is now they're saying that, but all the right wingers who they got their support from, they got from literally just saying the most misogynistic shit possible about women in the military.
been serving in combat for a long time. Women have even been serving in combat units like infantry battalions for a long time in roles like medics or mechanics or what have you. So what we're talking about here specifically is women in ground combat roles in jobs like infantrymen or artillerymen or special forces. Until about 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Under Secretary Panetta, those roles were opened up to women to serve in. Has President Trump indicated at all that he plans to rescind or alter that guidance?
You're correct to point out, Senator, that these are the decisions that the Commander-in-Chief will have the prerogative to make. He has not indicated to me that he has plans to change whether or not women would have access to these roles. However, I would point out, ensuring that standards are equal and high is of importance to him and great importance to me. Because in those ground combat roles, what is true is that the weight of the ruck on your back doesn't change. The weight of the 155 round that you have to carry doesn't change. The weight of the 240 Bravo machine gun you might have to carry doesn't change. And so whether it's a man or a woman, they have to meet the same high standards. And Senator, in any place where those things have been eroded or in courses, criteria have been changed in order to meet quotas, racial quotas or gender quotas, that is putting a focus on something other than readiness, standards,
racial
meritocracy,
quotas. He's
and
just
lethality.
injecting
that's
that.
the
That
kind of
doesn't
review I'm
exist.
talking about, not whether women
What the
have
fuck is he
access to
talking
ground
about?
combat.
Okay, so thank you. So you expect no change to that guidance, but as you point out, in these specific jobs, there are irreducible physical demands. We expect our intelligence analysts and our mechanics to be physically fit in the military, but it's different when you're in the infantry or the artillery. You just mentioned a few things. Let me point it out. An artillery shell weighs almost 100 pounds. An Abrams tank round weighs around 50 pounds. The M240 Bravo machine gun with its tripod weighs almost 50 pounds. The average weight of a full kit, ammo, water, commo, body armor for a soldier is over 100 pounds. Nothing you can do can change any of those things, right? That is physical reality.
Go ahead. Yes, Senator. And I would say the requirements to handle those things in a ground combat unit, as far as standards, can look different than those of a medic or a drone pilot. And so it's not that it has to be the same standard throughout. It's standards to maximize efficacy of that particular position.
Let me read a quote here from one Army officer. While it may be difficult for a 120-pound woman to lift or drag 250 pounds, the Army cannot artificially absolve women of that responsibility. It may still exist on the battlefield. The entire purpose of creating a gender-neutral test was to acknowledge the reality that each job has objective physical standards to which all soldiers should be held, regardless of gender. The intent was not to ensure that women and men will have an equal likelihood of meeting those standards. I assume, based on your testimony, you agree with that Army officer?
Absolutely. The standards need to be the same and they need to be high. And they need to be set by the people closest to the problem set, closest to the understanding of what is required by that job. Commanders, commanding officers, and COCOMs and elsewhere who understand the reality of what they face, that's the feedback we should get. That's what should be enshrined and enforced. And no other set of political prerogatives. When I talk about removing politics, ideological or political prerogatives should contribute to those determinations. Nothing other than the execution of the mission.
Thank you. For the record, that Army officer was Captain Kristen Griest, the Army's first female infantry officer and one of its first female
There are women who are
Ranger School
capable, so it
graduates.
doesn't make sense to blanket
One
ban
final
women
point,
for
you said they
military
need to be
roles unless the
objective,
reason is
gender neutral, and
ideological.
high.
Basically, they're pivoting away from that. They're trying to say that oh no, we don't want to ban women. We're just gonna make these objective standards. But the reality is, if you actually know about what's going on in the military, they are having problems with recruitment, right? And you know what happens when they have problems with recruitment? They lower the standards because the standards are malleable. They move around based on exactly, whether or not there's a a lot of people looking for a military job, or there's not. You know when people join the military at the highest rate, chat? When there's an economic recession, because it's a job that people get a job so they don't go become homeless, right? So you go and join the military because you can't find a job. But when you can find a job in civilian life, they see a deficit in recruitment. And that's exactly the situation you're finding now, is people are not flooding to the military, so they're lowering standards.
That's because the demands are, in fact, very high. The current physical fitness test for the Army has a minimum 2-mile run of 22 miles. Run.
22 minutes, he means.
And I want the reporter to note that I'm putting run in air quotes, because 22 miles at 2 miles is not running. It may be jogging.
22 minutes. 22 minutes at 2 miles. He's saying that's not really a run.
It's probably walking fast. Let's move on. We've got a big 22 minutes. We've got a big audience here.
us.
Many of them seem to be patriotic supporters of you, Mr. Hegseth. Some of them seem to be liberal critics of you. I would note that it's only the liberal critics that have disrupted this hearing. As was my custom during the Biden administration, I want to give you a chance to respond to what they said about you. I think the first one accused you of being a Christian Zionist. I'm not really sure why that is a bad thing. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is that the Jewish people deserve a homeland in the ancient
Dude, you're
Holy
from
Land where
Arkansas
they've
and your
lived
name
since
is
the dawn
Tom
of history.
Cotton. Of course you
Consider
believe
yourself
in
a Christian
Zionism and
Zionist.
supremacy.
I am a Christian, and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense and the way America
I
comes
robustly
alongside
support
them.
Israel. This
Thank
is
you. 'Cause
America
another
first, by
protester,
the
I
way.
think this one was a member of Code Pink, which, by the way, is a Chinese Communist front group these days, said that you support Israel's war in Gaza. I support Israel's existential war in Gaza. I assume, like me and President Trump, you support that war as well, don't you?
Senator, I do. I support Israel destroying and killing every last member of Hamas.
And the third protester said something about 20 years of genocide. I assume
Would you support the destruction of every single Nazi? Would you support killing every single Nazi? That's a serious question, by the way. Would you have supported killing every Nazi? And the answer is absolutely not. The Americans were very, very eager to save as many Nazis' lives as they could. Kind of interesting, isn't it?
our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you think our troops are committing genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Senator, I do not. I think
you
our
imagine
senators,
just
our
like-
troops, as you know, as so many in this committee know, did the best they could with what they had. We're not the outcomes, and tragically, the outcome we saw in Afghanistan under the Biden administration put a stain on that, but it doesn't put a stain on what those men and women did in uniform, as you know full well, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth.
This
Thank you,
confirmation
Senator
hearing is
Cotton. At this
boring, man.
point, I ask unanimous consent to offer to the record a letter submitted by Omar Abbasi, son of former city council president of Samarra, Iraq, who worked with Mr. Hegseth in Iraq. Without objection, that will be entered. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you,
You
Mr.
can't
Chairman.
sue for,
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. I do want to
people in
thank you for your
Congress for what
service.
they say during
and I want to thank you for your
proceedings.
willingness to serve in this
Kat.
capacity.
They have a,
Thank you, Senator.
I have many
what congressional members say during these during hearings has a constitutional immunity.
concerns about your record, and particularly your public statements, because they are so hurtful to the men and women who are currently serving in the U.S. military, harmful to morale, harmful to good order and discipline. If you are saying that women shouldn't be serving in the
called the
military, and I'm going to
speech and
read you your
debate clause.
quotes, because the quotes themselves are terrible. You will have to change how you see women
case you're
to do
wondering.
this job well, and I don't know if you are capable of that. So I want to press on these issues that my colleague Jean Shaheen brought up, because she said it so well. So first of all, you answered your questionnaire. Do you believe that any American who wants to serve in their country in the military and can meet objective standards set by the military should be allowed to serve without limitation? You've said yes to that question. But then in all of these other circumstances, you've denigrated active duty service members. We have hundreds of women who are currently in the infantry, lethal members of our military serving in the infantry, but you degrade them. You say, we need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units. So specific to Senator Cotton's question, because Senator Cotton was giving you layups to differentiate between different types of combat. And specifically, as secretary, would you take any action to reinstitute the combat arms exclusion for female service members, knowing full well you have hundreds of women doing that job right now? And the standards, your 2-mile run, Tom, is about the Army Combat Fitness Test. It is not the requirements to have an MOS 11 Bravo, which is the infantry. These are the requirements today for people serving in the industry, men and women. They are gender neutral, and they are very difficult to meet. They have not been reduced in any way, and our combat units, our infantry is lethal. So please explain specifically, because you will be in charge of 3 million personnel. It is a big job. And when you make these public statements, and I get you were not Secretary of Defense then, I get you were on TV, I get you were helping veterans, I get it was a different job. But most recently, you said this in November of 2024, knowing full well you might have been named as Secretary of Defense. So please explain these types of statements, because they're brutal, and they're mean, and they disrespect men and women who are willing to die for this country.
Well, Senator, I appreciate your comments, and I would point out I have never disparaged women serving in the military. I respect every single female service member that has put on the uniform, past and present. My critiques, Senator, recently and in the past, and from personal experience, have been instances where I've seen standards lowered, and you mentioned 11 Alpha, 11 Bravo, MOS, places in units, and the book that has been referenced multiple times here, The War on Warriors. I spent months talking to active duty service members, men and women, low ranks, high ranks, combat arms and not combat arms. And what each and every one of them told me, and which personal instances have shown me, is that in ways direct, indirect, overt, and subtle, standards have been changed inside infantry training units, ranger school, infantry battalions, to ensure that
Give me one example. Please give me an example. I get you're making these generalized statements.
Commanders meet quotas to have a certain number of female infantry officers or infantry enlisted, and that disparages those women
Commanders
who are
do not
incredibly
have to
capable
be
of meeting
quotas
that
for the
standard.
infantry. Commanders do not have to have a quota for women in the infantry. That does not exist. It does not exist. And your statements are creating the impression that these exist, because they do not. There are not quotas. We want the most lethal force. But I'm telling you, having been here for 15 years, listening to testimony about men and women in combat and the type of operations that were successful in Afghanistan and in Iraq, women were essential for many of those units. When Ranger units went in to find where the terrorists hiding in Afghanistan or in Iraq, if they had a woman in the unit, they could go in, talk to the women in a village, say, where are the terrorists hiding? Where are the weapons hiding? And get crucial information to make sure that we can win that battle. So you cannot denigrate women in general, and your statements do that. We don't want women in the military, especially in combat. What a terrible statement. So please, do not deny that you've made those statements. You have. We take the responsibility of standards very seriously, and we will work with you. I'm equally distressed you would not meet with me before this hearing. We could have covered all of this before you came here, so I could get to the 15 other questions that I want to get to. So women, you have denigrated. You have also denigrated members of the LGBTQ community. Did you know that when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in place, we lost so many crucial personnel, over 1,000 in mission-critical areas. We lost 10% of all our foreign language speakers because of a political policy. You said in your statement, you don't want politics in the DOD. Everything you've said in these public statements is politics. I don't want women, I don't want moms. What's wrong with a mom, by the way? Once you have babies, you therefore are no longer able to be lethal. I mean, you're basically saying women, after they have children, can't ever serve in the military in a combat role. It's a silly thing to say. It's a silly thing to say, beneath the position that you are aspiring to. To denigrate LGBTQ service members is a mistake. If you are a sharpshooter, you're as lethal regardless of what your gender identity is, regardless of who you love. So please know this to be a true statement. So you say it was a political thing. You say it undermined us, social engineering. I don't know why someone having to publicly say or not publicly say who they love is social engineering. I think having that policy in the first place was highly problematic. And as you said in your statement, do you agree anybody should be able to serve in the military if they meet the standards?
Senator, as the president has stated, I don't disagree with the overturn of Don't Ask.
By the way, Pod Save America thinks that she was like a really good candidate in 2020.
Don't tell.
Great, because I don't want you thinking, can't serve if you're a mom, can't serve if you're LGBTQ, and then last, can't serve if you're a leftist. The statements you said about people who have views differently than you, that we're the enemy, are you saying that 50% of the DOD, if they hold liberal views or leftist views or are Democrats, are not welcome in the military? Are you saying that?
Senator, I volunteered to deploy to Afghanistan under Democrat President Barack Obama. I also volunteered to guard the inauguration of Joe Biden, but was denied the opportunity to serve because I was identified as an extremist by my own unit for a Christian tattoo.
A Christian
Thank you
tattoo?
very
A
much.
crusader
Senator
tattoo, you
Gillibrand,
mean?
You held up a document.
White nationalist
and referred to
tattoo?
it during your questioning. Would you like that entered into the record? Okay, okay, we'll delete.
We'll submit a
clean
clean
it up.
copy.
Without objection, that will be admitted at the point of your question. And I would like to enter into the record at this point a letter of support from retired Air Force Colonel Melissa Cunningham. Colonel Cunningham supports Mr. Hegseth and mentions his warrior ethos, combat effectiveness, and maintaining military training standards. So without objection, both of those will be admitted, and I now recognize Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, good morning. I'd like to thank you for your service to our nation in uniform and also your work on behalf of your fellow veterans and for your willingness to enter into this maelstrom of public service. I think the presence of so many veterans who have showed up to support you speaks volumes. I also want to recognize your family service and sacrifice. You know as well as anyone that it's not just the man that enters the arena, but it's the entire family who also works their way through this process as well. I appreciated our meeting with you and with your wife, Jennifer, this last month. I thought that we had an excellent conversation, and I appreciate your statement and your answers to the advanced policy questions, especially your desire to bring a renewed focus on warfighting and lethality to the Pentagon. I also respect and I appreciate my friend and colleague, Senator Gillibrand, and some of her questions, and I know that she had a number of them in there. You had an opportunity to respond very briefly. Were there any other responses that you would like to make or clarifications that you would like to make before I move on to my questions?
Senator, thank you very much for the opportunity to meet and for the question. I would also acknowledge you were mentioning female engagement teams, which have shown a great deal of success on the battlefield. It would be and universally acknowledged as such. I've been in Iraqi homes where the language and gender barrier was real, and the ability to have someone there to help in that process would be a massive accelerant in mission success. I recognize that reality. I also recognize that female engagement teams assigned to a SEAL team or a Green Beret team meet different standards also, which is okay because of the duty positions involved in that job. As far as politics, Senator, it has been the joy of my life to lead men and women in military outfits. When you're in combat or in training, there's a lot of conversations that happen. And you start to realize that a lot of people you're serving with share your political ideas or they don't. You find out there's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's Libertarians, there's Independents, there's Vegetarians, everything in between. None of that matters. It never mattered in how I led men and women, how I interacted with them, what missions we undertook. Politics has nothing to do with the battlefield, which is why President Trump has asked me to say, let's make sure all of that comes out. This is about warfighting capability, setting standards high, and making sure we give our boys, our men
I'm not
and
going
women.
to pause it because I want to catch up, but I will say this, like, one of the things that's really interesting is that there is an attempt to kind of professionalize war by removing it from the political realm. That actually isn't what's happening, right? That is a rhetorical move, right? Because politics is about, and this is very important, politics is about the distribution of resources in society, right? That's what it is. Because we have an economy that is a collective product of everybody. We have a political system that regulates and controls that economy. And the military is part of that economy. And so the military needs resources in order to function. Exactly how much resources and what that military is used for is obviously a political question. Right? So, and how you fight is also a political question, right? If you're focused on like a qualitative superiority over your enemy using professional troops, and you're going to be involved in a lot of, covert and operations, you have to do politics. In fact, we have a political wing of our special forces. It's called the Green Berets. The Green Berets, a better way to understand the Green Berets is build your own Gestapo, okay? The purpose of the Green Berets is to implant fascist movements across the world, all right? It's an intensely political organization. It is basically a way of America interfering with countries that are outside the pale of the so-called Western world and influence and create politically within those polities a fascist movement, fascist guerrilla movement. That's what the Green Berets do. They go around and they set up far-right death squads. So to say that the U.S. military is not political is very funny, because spending money is exactly what they do. And to get those resources, you have to have a political system that sends them your way.
Opportunity for others to engage the U.S. on multiple fronts along the continuum of the conflict. As we discussed in my office, neither of us wants to send our troops into a fair
Will
fight.
VODs ever be available to non-subscribers? Just ask for a sub, honestly.
Given the growing potential of a multi-theater conflict involving near-peer adversaries, what steps would you take to prepare the Department of Defense to simultaneously execute and sustain operations across multiple regions while maintaining readiness and deterrence globally? And I just have to make note, and I want to make it clear, we have language in this year's fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act calling for a review of the department's operational plans. And I just want to make sure that you're aware of that, and that we will have, if we have a fight with one, the chances are very good that we're going to have two battles or two different battlegrounds at the same time.
Senator, which is why I believe our country's incredibly fortunate to have a new commander-in-chief in Donald Trump, who through the strategic approach he has taken with allies and against foes has prevented wars and is determined to do the same. That's our chief job, is deter and prevent wars. My job, should I be confirmed at the Secretary of Defense, is to ensure we have the right prioritization of assets and strategy, and then the tools in the toolbox necessary, the pointiest possible spear for President Trump to wield if necessary as the last resort. So President Trump at the helm, I think, will go a long way in making sure our enemies know there's a new sheriff in town.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. Thank you for being here, Mr. Hegseth. And I want to join in expressing appreciation and respect for your service to our country, and thanks to all the veterans who are here today, and thank you for your service as the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I hope we can focus on doing better for our veterans and doing better in management of the Department of Defense. There's always room for improvement. I think what we need in that position is not just better, but the best in financial management, because those decisions are life and death decisions affecting the 3.4 million Americans who serve our national security and our national defense and put their lives on the line. I want to talk about financial mismanagement at the two organizations that you headed, which are the only test of your financial management that we have before this committee, the Veterans for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. You took over the Veterans for Freedom in 2007. In 2008, you raised $8.7 million, but spent more than $9 million, creating a deficit. By January 2009, you told donors that the organization had less than $1,000 in the bank and debts of $434,000. By 2010, revenue at the Veterans for Freedom had dropped to about $265,000. In the next year, it had dropped further to $22,000. You don't dispute these numbers, do you?
Senator, I'm extremely proud of the work me and my fellow vets did at Vets for Freedom. A bunch of young vets with no political experience, a small group, working hard every single day. We raised donor funds. And and we have letters submitted for the record from almost everyone that worked with me every single day, including our chief operating officer, who will attest that every dollar we raised was used intentionally toward the execution of our mission, which is supporting the warfighters, exactly why we're here today, the warfighters in the Iraq surge. There was a campaign in 2008, Senator. It was Barack Obama versus John McCain. We believe John McCain would be the right person to win, and so we spent
tax
more.
Returns from that organization.
I'm glad they're for the record.
I'm going to ask to be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
These tax returns are yours. They have your signature, and I'm going to ask that members of the committee review them because they're the only documents. I've asked for others. I've asked for the FBI report that would presumably document, it should have documented, this kind of financial mismanagement. And these are the 990s from that organization. By the year of 2011, donors had become so dissatisfied with that mismanagement, they in effect ousted you. They merged that organization with Military Families United, and thereafter you joined a second organization. as executive director.
In
the
between,
concerned
Senator, I went
veterans-
to Harvard
I want to
University
ask
for 2
you
years and
questions.
Afghanistan.
I want to ask you questions about Concerned Veterans for America. Again, another set of tax returns, the 990s from that organization. I ask they be made part of the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, both of those returns are now part of the record.
2011 to 2016. At the end of 2013, shortfall of $130,000. At the end of 2014, shortfall of $428,000. You had a surplus the following year, but then another deficit of $437,000. By the time you left, that organization had deep debts, including credit card transaction debts of about $75,000. That isn't the kind of fiscal management we want at the Department of Defense. We can't tolerate it at the Department of...
Okay, a couple things here. First of all, the Hegseth's resume is so thin. He's leading some sort of like hack partisan nonprofit, and the Democrats' argument against him is your hack partisan nonprofit was losing money. And it's like, this is what most nonprofits are in America. This is nonprofit system in America. It's just grifts that individuals have set up to scam as many dopes as they can, and that's it. And also, the idea that the DOD isn't wasting... The DOD just spent $80 billion this week because it's the end of the fiscal year, and they have to spend all their money down. I mean, they're buying lobster tails. They're buying bullets that they don't need right now. Like, what are you talking about? They're incredibly profligate. Like, it is what it is.
Senator, the United States Army, 450,000 on active duty, sir.
And how many in the Navy?
And the Navy.
Okay, Mehdi Hassad did a Hegseth video. Okay.
End of his presidential campaign, Donald Trump attempted to brand himself as the peace candidate, the anti-war guy, a delusional lie some on the left, including even some Muslim and Arab voters, fell for. But Mehdi, how can you say it was a lie? Trump's not even back in office yet. Well, meet Pete Hegseth, the man Donald Trump has nominated to be his new Secretary of Defense, a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, a TV host on Fox with zero experience of governing, who was reportedly picked by Trump because he has the look. But it's not the look or his lack of experience that should really bother you. It's Hegseth's love of war and war crimes and war criminals. For example, while most people in Washington now accept the Iraq War was at best a mistake, at worst a disaster, Hegseth, for a very long time, was a proud fan of that illegal invasion. Here he is in 2016.
The Iraq War is an example of what America got right when we got it right.
Back in 2017, Hegseth pushed the insane idea that the US should consider launching a preemptive strike on nuclear-armed North Korea.
What, will annihilate North Korea after we're dead?
Yeah,
I mean, we have to do something now.
There's merit in a preemptive strike. You got to do it right. It's got to be decisive.
In 2020, Hegseth openly encouraged Trump to commit war crimes, saying international law is rigged against the US, and even tried to justify the US bombing religious and cultural sites in Iran.
We need to rewrite the rules that are advantageous to us. I don't want to hit cultural sites on purpose, but if you're using one to harbor your most dangerous weapons, then that should be on the target list.
And the president did. The classic human shields argument. Sounds like he'll get along great with Netanyahu. Oh, and speaking of Israel, Hegseth is a Christian Zionist who proudly has a Jerusalem cross tattooed on his chest, as you can see from his Instagram, and has openly advocated for building the third temple in Jerusalem, which is a dream of far-right Israeli fanatics and requires the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
The declaration of Jerusalem as the capital was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible.
Hegseth is also an advocate for war criminals and alleged war criminals. Back in 2019, he was the guy who helped persuade Donald Trump to pardon 3 soldiers convicted, charged, or accused of horrific war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was open about his support for them.
These are men who went into the most dangerous places on earth with a job to defend us and made tough calls on a moment's notice. They're not war criminals, they're warriors.
Of course, we shouldn't be surprised about Hegseth being totally fine with the killing of Arabs or Afghans. He's been pushing Islamophobic, bigoted nonsense for years. He literally wrote a book called American Crusade, in which he complained about Muslim birth rates and praised the Crusaders for pushing back against Muslim hordes. In 2016, on Fox, he even went to Hamtramck, Michigan, the Muslim-majority town where local Arab politicians and imams just endorsed Trump as the peace candidate. He went to Hamtramck and said this about the local Muslim population.
There's a lot of anxiety. We're not sure if they're not actually integrating as much as we'd want them to. 27 languages in the schools, segmentation in the town. There's a Yemeni portion, there's a Bangladeshi part. There isn't as much assimilation, folks.
Hegseth is an Islamophobic Christian Zionist hawk, and he'll be in charge of the U.S. military. Now, his defenders say, well, he's a smart guy. He went to Princeton. He has a master's from Harvard. True, but he's also this guy.
I don't think I've washed my hands for 10 years. Really, I don't really wash my hands ever.
Yeah, he doesn't believe in
wash his
germs.
hands after he takes a shit. I forgot about that.
So a word of advice to generals at the Pentagon: maybe avoid shaking hands with your new boss.
Really concerned and upset about the wasteful Washington spending and of course, in our
Chat, it's Jody Ernst. This is Jody Ernst, chat. She grew her hair out.
Joni Ernst. I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm. So when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork.
Joni Ernst, mother, soldier, conservative.
My parents taught us to live within our means. It's time to force Washington to do the same. To cut wasteful spending, repeal Obamacare, and balance the budget. I'm Joni Ernst, and I approve this message because Washington's full of big spenders. Let's make them squeal.
2014 was the first year. We discovered a 2013 op-ed I wrote about the need for a Pentagon audit, because an audit is an issue of national security and frankly, respect to American taxpayers who give $850 billion over to the Defense Department and expect that we know where that money goes. And if that money is going somewhere that doesn't add to tooth and instead goes to fat or tail, we need to know that. Or if it's wasted, we need to know that. So I think previous secretaries of defense, with all due respect, haven't necessarily emphasized the strategic prerogative of an audit. And myself, my deputy SecDef, and others already know that a Pentagon audit will be, the comptroller, others, central to ensuring we find those dollars that can be used elsewhere legally under the law inside the Pentagon. So you have my word, it will be a priority.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to women in combat, and I had the privilege of serving in uniform for over 23 years between our Army Reserves and our Iowa Army National Guard, did serve in Kuwait and missions in Iraq. And so it is incredibly important that I stress, and I hope that if confirmed, you continue to stress, that every man and woman has opportunity to serve their country in uniform and do so at any level as long as they are meeting the standards that are set forward. And we talked about that in my office. I do believe in high standards. Now, I was denied the opportunity to serve in any combat role because I have a lot of gray hair. And the policy has changed since then, okay? So I've been around for quite a while. But for the young women that are out there now and can meet those standards, and again, I'll emphasize they should be very, very high standards. They must physically be able to achieve those standards so that they can complete their mission. But I want to know, again, let's make it very clear for everyone here today. As Secretary of Defense, will you support women continuing to have the opportunity to serve in combat roles?
So she's a soldier, remember?
Senator, first of all, thank you for your service, as we discussed extensively as well.
It's my privilege.
And my answer is yes, exactly the way that you caveated it. Yes, women will have access to ground combat roles, given the standards remain high, and we'll have a review to ensure the standards have not been eroded. In any one of these cases. That'll be part of one of the first things we do at the Pentagon is reviewing that in a gender-neutral way, the standards, ensuring readiness and meritocracy is front and center. But absolutely, it would be the privilege of a lifetime, if confirmed, to be the Secretary of Defense for all men and women in uniform who fight so heroic. They have so many other options. They decide to put their right hand up for our country. And it would be an honor to have a chance to lead them.
Thank you. And just very briefly, we only have less than a minute left, but we have also discussed this in my office. A priority of mine has been combating sexual assault in the military and making sure that all of our service members are treated with dignity and respect. This has been so important. Senator Gillibrand and I have worked on this, and we were able to get changes made to the Uniform Code of Military Justice to make sure that we have improvements and on how we address the tragic and life-altering issues of rape, sexual assault. It will demand time and attention from the Pentagon under your watch if you are confirmed. So as Secretary of Defense, will you appoint a senior level official dedicated to sexual assault prevention and response?
Senator, as we have discussed, yes, I will.
Okay, and my time has expired. Thank you for your answers.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hegseth, welcome.
Thank you.
I am focused on your fitness to serve, including your character and temperament and your overall qualifications to do the job. And I do appreciate the comments of Ranking Member Reed with his concerns regarding your nomination, because I share those concerns. As part of my responsibility as a member of this committee to ensure the fitness of all nominees to come before any of the committees on which I sit, I ask the following two initial questions. First, since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
Senator, I was falsely accused in October of 2017. It was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared.
I don't think completely cleared is accurate, but the fact is that your own lawyer said that you entered into an NDA and paid a person who accused you of raping her a sum of money to make sure that she did not file a complaint. Moving on. As Secretary, you will be in charge of maintaining good order and discipline by enforcing the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ. In addition to the sexual assault allegations, and by the way, the answer to my second question should have been yes. I have read multiple reports of your regularly being drunk at work, including by people who worked with you at Fox News. Do you know that being drunk at work is prohibited for service members under the UCMJ?
Senator, those
Yes
are
or no?
multiple false anonymous reports peddled by NBC
Do you
News
know
that
that
run directly
drinking on the job
contradictory to
is
the dozens of men and women at
not
Fox News
contemplated
Channel
on-
who
I'm not
I work
hearing-
with,
I'm
who
not
came
hearing
on
the
the
answer to my
record
question.
and said they've
In your
never
opening
seen
statement,
that.
Mr. Hegseth, you commit to holding leaders accountable at all levels. That includes you, of course. And frankly, as Secretary, you will be on the job 24/7. You recently promised some of my Republican colleagues that you stopped drinking and won't drink if confirmed, correct?
Absolutely.
Will you resign as Secretary of Defense if you drink on the job, which is a 24/7 position?
I've made this commitment on behalf of the
Will you
men and women I'm
resign
serving.
as Secretary of Defense
I've
if
made this
you
commitment
drink
on
on the
behalf of
job?
the men and women I'm serving
I'm not
because it's
hearing-
the most important deployment
I'm not
of my
hearing an
life.
answer to my question, so I'm going to move on. While you have made that commitment, you will not commit to resigning if you drink on the job. As Secretary of Defense, you will swear an oath to the Constitution and not an oath to any man, woman, or president, correct?
Senator, on multiple occasions, including as a young second lieutenant, I have sworn an oath to the
Answer is
Constitution,
yes.
and I'm proud to do so. Yes, ma'am.
In June of 2020, then President Trump directed former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper to shoot protesters in the legs in downtown DC, an order Secretary Esper refused to comply with. Would you carry out such an order from President Trump?
Senator, I was in the Washington, D.C. National Guard unit that was in Lafayette Square during those
Would you
events,
carry
holding
out
a
an
riot
order to
shield on
shoot
behalf of my
protesters
country.
in the legs?
I saw 50
as
Secret
directed
Service agents
to
get injured
Secretary
by
Esper?
rioters trying to jump over the fence, set
Again,
the church on fire, and
You
destroy
know
a
what,
statue.
that sounds to me that you will
Chaos.
comply with such an order. You will shoot protesters in the leg. Moving on. President-elect has attacked our allies in recent weeks, refusing to rule out using military force to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal, and threatening to make Canada the 51st state. Would you carry out an order from President Trump to seize Greenland, a territory of our NATO ally Denmark, by force, or would you comply with an order to take over the Panama Canal?
Senator, I will emphasize that President Trump received 77 million votes to be the lawful
We're
commander-in-chief
not
of
talking
this
about
country.
the election. My question is, would you use our military to take over Greenland or
Panama.
an ally of Denmark?
Senator, one of the things that President Trump is so good at is never strategically tipping his hand. And so I would never in this public forum give one way or another
So
direct what orders
that
the president would
sounds
give
to
me in any context.
That sounds to me that you would contemplate carrying out such an order to basically invade Greenland and take over the Panama Canal. Current DoD policy allows service
Damn.
members and eligible dependents.
By the way, do you see how much more effective it is to be aggressive against these people? Like, do you see, like, the little whining, oh, you're being mean to women, it's so much less effective than just being straightforward and on the point and on the issues. Does that surprise you? It's like, wow, he's getting flustered. He can't even speak.
To be reimbursed for travel associated with non-covered reproductive health care, including abortions. Will you maintain this common sense policy?
Senator, I've always been personally pro-life. I know President Trump has as well, and we will review all policies, but our standard is whatever the president wants on this particular issue. With my advice, I will take a look at.
If the president tells you that this common sense policy will not be maintained, you will not enable our service members to seek reproductive care. So it sounds
I don't
like to
believe the
me.
federal government
I'm not
should be
hearing
funding
answers to my questions,
travel for
Mr.
abortion.
Chairman. I just want to note that the other area that of serious concern to me is President Trump saying that he wants to use the military to help with mass deportations, which will cost billions of dollars. And what that will do to readiness is very, very concerning. Mr. Hegseth, I have noticed a disturbing pattern. You previously have made a series of inflammatory statements about women in combat, LGBTQ service members, Muslim Americans, and Democrats. Since your nominations, however, you have walked those back on TV in interviews and most recently in your opening statements. You are no longer on Fox and Friends, Mr. Hegseth. If confirmed, your words, actions, and decisions will have real impacts on national security and our service members' lives. There are close to 3 million personnel in the Department of Defense, $900 billion budget. I hardly think you are prepared to do the job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator,
Thank you. That wasn't a question, Mr. Hegseth. Thank you, Senator Rono. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Hegseth. Congratulations on your nomination, and thank you and your family for your service and sacrifice.
Thank you, Senator.
Now for the most important question you will receive all day. In 1935, before the Congress, the father of the United States Air Force, General Billy Mitchell, was testifying about a certain place in the world. He said, quote, I believe that in the future, whoever holds this place will control the world. This location is the most strategic place in the world.
Alaska?
What place was
Hawaii?
Billy Mitchell talking about? And let me give you a hint, it wasn't Greenland.
Panama Canal.
I believe he was talking about the great state of Alaska.
He was talking about the great state of Alaska. Great answer. If confirmed, will you commit to come with me to the great state of Alaska and meet our warriors who are on the front lines every day?
Senator, I have, and as I mentioned to you in the past, I did a brief training exercise up at Fort Wainwright at a previous part of my military life. I look forward to returning.
Great, and I will say, we are on the front lines with this new era of authoritarian aggression in Alaska. The last 2 years, we've had Chinese and Russian naval task forces, joint strategic bomber task forces in our EEZ, in our ADIZ, and after his election, President Trump put out an extensive statement on Alaska, which included the following statement: we will ensure Alaska gets even more defense investments as we fully rebuild our military, especially as Russia and China are making menacing moves in the Pacific. Mr. Hegseth, if confirmed, will you work with me, this committee, and the incoming Commander-in-Chief on continuing to build up our military assets and infrastructure in Alaska to reestablish deterrence in the Arctic and in the Indo-Pacific?
If confirmed, Senator, it would be a pleasure to work alongside you and this entire committee to recognize the very real threat in the Indo-Pacific, the very real ways, even these past couple of weeks, that Russia has attempted to probe and push in and around Alaska, and also the very real strategic significance of Alaska vis-a-vis shipping lanes through the Arctic. There are many, many ways in which Alaska is strategically significant, and with a necessary shift toward Indo-PACOM, Alaska, by necessity, will play an important role in that.
Thank you, Ms. Hegseth. I very much appreciate your focus on lethality in warfighting. We desperately need it. I want to provide a few examples of the Biden woke military, which is not focused on readiness or lethality, and want to get your comments on it. Nobody wants an extremist or racist in our military, but one of the most disgraceful and shameful things I've seen over the past 4 years as a senator on this committee and as a Marine Corps Reserve officer was on day one, the Biden administration played up a false and insulting narrative that our military was chock full of racist and violent extremists. This reached a pinnacle in this committee when Biden's Undersecretary of Policy, Colin Kahl, the #3 guy at the Pentagon, testified that one of his top goals would be to, quote, ending violent extremism and systemic racism within the ranks of the military. He had no data on this. The media loved it, fanned the flames, wrote baloney stories on this false narrative. Disappointingly, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here reinforce this ridiculous narrative, one even suggesting that almost 10% of our uniformed military was extremists, 200,000 members. Ridiculous, by the way, from this committee on the other side of the aisle. Mr. Hegseth, unlike Undersecretary Call, you have a lot of experience with our military. Do you believe the military is a
This guy was actually one of those extremists that he was caught.
systemically racist organization? And if confirmed, will you commit to defend, not denigrate our troops?
Senator, I was also offended by those comments because anyone who's been on active duty in the National Guard, man, woman, in units, understand that it's fundamentally false.
By the way, there's 3 studies, to his credit, Secretary Austin put out one of them, that said exactly what you just said. Fundamentally false.
Senator, they knew it. Anyone who'd been in a unit knew it. One could argue that if not the least, one of the least racist institutions in our country is the United States military. Being a racist in our military has not been tolerated for a very long time.
One of the
Never in my
greatest civil
formations,
rights
never in other
organizations in
formations.
America. Would you agree the U.S. military is one of the most forward-leaning, probably one of the greatest civil rights organizations in American history?
No doubt.
Let me turn to another one.
It's so funny when like conservatives are like, America's military they were least racist. We love that. But at the time they were like, this is a communist plot to undermine our military by forcing us, our good Mississippi white boys, to bunk with blacks. We hate it. Like every single step of the way, conservatives were against it. But now they're like, now it's the most civil rights organization.
Last year at a hearing before this committee,
That
I
sounds
called on
woke
the
as
Biden
fuck.
Secretary of the Navy to resign because he's failing in his ability to build ships. We are being completely outbuilt in terms of ships by the Chinese, and yet this Secretary of the Navy has been focused on climate change, not building ships in lethality. Mr. Secretary,
The Chinese have 50 times the shipbuilding capability. And America actually just announced today that it's not fair, and they want to create a whole bunch of penalties for any kind of Chinese-built ship. It's not fair. You're dominating. The U.S. only produces 1% of ships. China produces 50% of ships in the world. The United States has dwindled below 1%.
Mr. Hegseth, if your Secretary of the Navy ends up focusing on climate change more than shipbuilding and lethality, will you commit to me to fire him?
My Secretary of the Navy, should I be confirmed, sir, will not be focused on climate change in the Navy, just like the Secretary of the Air Force won't be focused on LG-powered fighter jets, or the Secretary of the Army will not be focused on electric-powered tanks.
Let me ask,
We're going to be focused on lethality and defeating our enemy.
And I appreciate that.
Actually, electric-powered tanks would make perfect sense because electric motors have a lot of torque. So it's exactly the type of power, instant power that you want. It's actually, it's the turbine and also electric tanks, obviously it depends on how energy dense the batteries are, right? But like, it's not a bad idea necessarily. Like it just depends on what the physics and the engineering say, right? More torque means you could have a smaller engine, which weighs less. It's also much more, fuel is explosive and dangerous, and it requires a long logistics chain. It's very funny how they just think electric engine equals gay, and therefore they don't want to do research in it. This is why China has a massive advantage over the United States. Because the United States has a bunch of these kind of conservatives, the truck nut conservative, they're not actually looking at what the best weapons are, right? They're looking at what can serve as a penis enhancer, a penis replacement. It's like, I want a big engine and a big long gun. And meanwhile, the Chinese are building millions of like little first-person drones to come up and fly up your asshole and instantaneously assassinate you, right? Like, the United States is going to be walking around with tanks that get swarmed by 100 drones and then explode because they're full of gasoline.
Thing President Biden did, his first executive order as president, was to focus on transgender surgeries for active duty troops. This is all I'm describing the woke military here under Biden over the last 4 years. If confirmed and you issue an order saying we are going to rip the Biden woke yoke off the neck of our military and focus on lethality and warfighting, how do you think the troops will react?
Senator, I know the troops will rejoice.
They will love it.
They will love it. And we've already seen it in recruiting numbers. There's already been a surge since President Trump won the election of recruiting. The Army says
Do you think our military will follow that order?
Our military will follow that order, Senator.
Gladly.
Gladly, because they want to focus on lethality and warfighting and get all the woke, political prerogative, politically correct, social justice, political stuff out of the military.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan.
Thank you,
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. I'm looking forward to this opportunity to talk. I want to return to the incident that you referenced a minute ago that occurred in Monterey, California in October 2017. At that time, you were still married to your second wife, correct?
I believe so.
And you had just fathered a child by a woman who would later become your third wife, correct?
Senator, I was falsely charged, fully investigated, and completely cleared.
So you think you were completely cleared because you committed no crime. That's your definition of cleared? You had just fathered a child 2 months before by a woman that was not your wife. I am shocked that you would stand here and say you're completely cleared. Can you so casually cheat on a second wife and cheat on the mother of a child that had been born 2 months before, and you tell us you are completely cleared? How is that a complete clear?
Senator, her child's name is Gwendolyn Hope Hegseth, and she's a child of God, and she's 7 years old.
And she was, and you cheated on the mother of that child less than 2 months after that daughter was born, didn't you?
Those were false charges. Well, it was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared. And I am so grateful for the marriage I have to this amazing woman behind me.
You've admitted that you had sex at that hotel in October 2017. You said it was consensual, isn't that correct?
Anything?
You've admitted that it was consensual, and you were still married, and you just had a child by another woman.
Again,
how do you explain your judgment?
Completely false charges against
me. Okay, Chad, the reason why this is happening, in case you're wondering, is it's actually illegal to commit adultery in the military. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's a crime if you're in the military to commit adultery. So, if you want to lead the military, but you're committing adultery all the time, and the reason why that is because, in case you're wondering, it opens people up to like blackmail and causes dissension in the ranks because, fucking people's wives and shit is bad and makes people mad. So it's against the law.
Whom you had just fathered a child. You have admitted that.
I will allow your words to speak for themselves.
You're not retracting that today. That's good. I assume that in each of your weddings, you've pledged to be faithful to your wife. You've taken an oath to do that, haven't you?
Oh, my God.
Senator, as I've acknowledged to everyone in this committee, not a perfect person, not claiming to be.
But no, I just asked a simple question. You've taken an oath, like you would take an oath to be Secretary of Defense, and all of your weddings to be faithful to your wife. Is that correct?
Tim Kaine in
I
the
have failed in things in my life, and thankfully I'm redeemed by my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
In finalizing divorces from your first and second wives, were there non-disclosure agreements in connection with those divorces?
Senator, not that I'm aware of.
If there were, would you agree to release those first and second wives from any confidentiality agreement?
Senator, it's not something I'm aware of.
But if there were, you would agree to release them from a confidentiality agreement?
Senator, that's not my responsibility.
Did you ever engage in any acts of physical violence against any of your wives?
Senator, absolutely not.
But you would agree with me that if someone had committed physical violence against a spouse, that would be disqualifying to serve as Secretary of Defense, correct?
Senator, absolutely not have I ever done that.
You would agree that that would be a disqualifying offense, would you not?
Senator, you're talking about a hypothetical.
I don't think it's a hypothetical. Violence against spouses occurs every day. And if you as a leader are not capable of saying that physical violence against a spouse should be a disqualifying fact for being secretary of the most powerful nation in the world, you're demonstrating an astonishing lack of judgment. The incident in Monterey led to a criminal charge, a criminal investigation, a private settlement, and a cash payment to the woman who filed the complaint. And there was also a non-disclosure agreement, correct?
It was a confidential settlement agreement off of a nuisance lawsuit.
Right. During an interview, you claimed that you settled the matter because you were worried that if it became public, it might hurt your career. Do you maintain that you were blackmailed?
Senator, I maintain that false claims were made against me. And ultimately,
your attorney
those
used
false
the
claims,
phrase,
I have the opportunity to attest my innocence in those false claims.
But you didn't reveal any of this to President Trump or the transition team as they were considering you to be nominated for Secretary of Defense. You didn't reveal the action. You didn't reveal the criminal complaint. You didn't reveal the criminal investigation. You didn't reveal the settlement. You didn't reveal the cash payment. Why didn't you inform the commander-in-chief and the transition team of this very relevant event?
Senator, I've appreciated every part of the process with the transition team. They have been open and honest with me. We've had great conversations between the two of us. And I appreciate the opportunity that President-elect Trump has given me.
You chose not to reveal this, right? Because you knew it would hurt your chances. So you chose not to reveal this really important thing to the commander-in-chief of the transition team because you were worried about your chances rather than trying to be candid with the future president of the United States. Are there any other important facts that you chose not to reveal to the president-elect and his team as they were considering you to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I sit here before you in open book, as everyone who's watched this process.
With multiple non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements tying the hands of many people who would like to comment to us. Much has been made of your workplace behavior as a leader of nonprofit veterans organizations and as a Fox News contributor. Were you fired from either of the leadership positions with the nonprofits?
I was the leader. I was the CEO of Concerned Veterans for America and Executive Director of Vets for Freedom.
Were you fired from either of them?
And I was never fired from a veterans organization.
Do you have non-disclosure agreements with either of those organizations?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Many of your work colleagues have said that you show up for work under the influence of alcohol or drunk. I know you've denied that, but you would agree with me, right, that if that was the case, that would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense.
Senator, those are all anonymous false claims, and the totality
they're not anonymous.
The letters on the record here.
They're not anonymous.
On the record,
we've seen records with names
Vets
attached
for Freedom,
to them.
Concerned Vets for America, and Fox News attributing to me working hard every day on behalf.
One of your colleagues said that you got drunk at an event at a bar and chanted, "Kill all Muslims." Another colleague, not anonymous, we have this, said that you took coworkers to a strip club. You were drunk, you tried to dance with strippers, you had to be held off the stage, and one of your employees in that event filed a sexual harassment charge as a result of it. Now, I know you denied these things, but isn't that the kind of behavior that, if true, would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, anonymous false charges.
They're not anonymous. And I'll just conclude and say this to the chairman. You claim that this was all anonymous. We have seen records with names attached to all of these, including the name of your own mother. So don't make this into some anonymous press thing. We have seen multiple names of colleagues consistently throughout your career that have talked about your abusive actions.
Chairman, I think he's over his time. He's way over his time.
I now yield.
By the way, Tim Kaine also was very good on starting to speak out against Israel during the Biden administration as well. Tim Kaine has redeemed the membrane a little tiny bit.
It states that there were no claims of domestic abuse or probable evidence of abuse in the relationship. Without objection, that will be added to the record. And we now move to Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hegseth, for your service, for your willingness to endure this. And I'm sorry for what has been happening to you, particularly the very idea that you should have to sit there and answer hypothetical potential, in somebody's imagination, crimes that may take place at some point. And wouldn't that disqualify you if you were a murderer or if you were a rapist? Unfair. And I'm embarrassed for this behavior. But first, I want to say thank you for your strong proclamation, unapologetic proclamation of faith in Jesus Christ. I sat here and listened to your opening statement and thought, wow, this is a guy who in today's culture is willing to stand up and say the first thing is first, faith in Jesus Christ. And I was reminded of what
None of
Christ
his
said
teachings,
in Matthew,
just
seek ye first the
turning
kingdom of
Jesus
God and his
Christ,
righteousness. And these things
turn Jesus Christ into an idol, turning Jesus Christ into an empty signifier of exclusionary cultural status. No, not one thing about being the peacemaker, about treating foreigners as native born. Not one thing about feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and ministering to the sick. No. It's just Jesus Christ as a culture war point. Not one of the actual teachings of the itinerant homeless preacher who had 12 men around him, right? No. It is Jesus Christ as a cudgel, a meaningless, as a tchotchke, as something that sits on your mantle, or a dust-covered Bible that you never read. Just worthless consumption, worthless signifier of a kind of twisted blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus who wants tax cuts.
in Guantanamo Bay, holding a riot shield outside the White House, I'd been identified as an extremist, as someone unworthy of guarding the inauguration of an incoming American president. And if that's happening to me, Senator, how many other men and women, how many other patriots, how many other people of conscience? We haven't even talked about COVID and the tens of thousands of service members who were kicked out because of an experimental vaccine. In President Trump's Defense Department, they will be apologized to, they will be reinstituted with pay and rank. Things like focusing on extremism, Senator, have created a climate inside our ranks that feel political when it hasn't ever been political. Those are the types of things that are going to change. And Senator Sullivan, you mentioned that study. After a whole study was held, extremism working group study, 100 extremists were identified in the ranks of 3 million. And most of those were gang-related. So it was a made-up boogeyman to begin with.
You, Mr. Hegseth, are not the extremist. The people who would deny you your expression of faith are the extremists. They're the racists. They're the bigots. You're the one that's protecting their right to be one. Thank you for that. I want to go to another point in your opening statement. And it's summarized in this beautiful one-sentence paragraph.
White Christian men, guys.
Quote, leaders at all levels will be held accountable. And warfighting and lethality and the readiness of the troops and their families will be our only focus. At that moment, in my mind's eye, I heard soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors, guardians from the Pentagon to the Pacific and everywhere in between applaud. And they're thinking, it's about time. I can get on board with that idea. And quite honestly, and I want to get to this because I think it's so important. I would say, I don't know, just about maybe everyone, I'm trying to think of an exception to this, that wears the uniform that has ever come before this committee or that I've met with privately, publicly, that I've been on tours with, that I've traveled with, that wear the uniform, whether it's with 4 stars or no stars, agrees with that statement. And I just want to caution you, and I'd be interested in your feedback on this. You know, there's been a lot of talk about firing woke generals, creating the purge group, and all those things you and I have talked about. I would say give those men and women a chance under new leadership. You know, my favorite painting in the rotunda is of George Washington retiring his commission, establishing on day one, a man who could have been king, chose to be a civilian leader of this country. And I just would encourage you to trust them first and look forward to them saluting the civilian leadership of this country. So just maybe if you could spend a minute just elaborating a little bit about the wokeness, where it comes from, and who will be held accountable.
The wokeness comes not from the uniform ranked, Senator, but from the political class. On day one, on January 20th, when President Trump is sworn in, he will issue a new set of lawful orders. And the leadership of our services will have an opportunity to follow those lawful orders or not. Those lawful orders will not be based on politics. They will be based on readiness, accountability standards, and lethality. That is the process by which leaders will be judged. And accountability is coming. Because everybody in this room knows, if you're a rifleman and you lose your rifle, they're throwing the book at you. Mm-hmm. But if you're a general who loses a war, you get a promotion. That's not going to happen in Donald Trump's Pentagon. There will be real standards.
So you're not going to have a lot of generals left in the Pentagon because they all do nothing but lose wars. Because, you know, going into aggressive wars with the idea you're going to win is the first step toward defeat.
Attitude, and you project an attitude of deterrence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hegseth, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Senator.
You've made several references to your religion today. I share that devotion to Christianity, but I must say I've been reminded somewhat of Saul on his way to Damascus. You seem to have been converted over the last several weeks and several months. You wrote in your book just last year that, but if we're going to, this is the book, War on Warriors, but if we're going to send our boys to fight, and it should be boys, we need to unleash them to win. Later on, our boys should not fight by rules written by dignified men. Which is it? Is it only boys can fight? I mean, you've testified here today that you believe in women in combat. You didn't just last year. How do you explain your conversion?
Senator, my testimony is clear. Writing a book is different than being Secretary of Defense. And I look forward to leading the men and women of our military. And my comment there, Senator, was about the burdensome rules of engagement that members of our generation, men and women, have seen on the battlefield. And one thing President Trump changed in meaningful ways that led to meaningful developments on the battlefield. When President Trump took control in the first term, ISIS was raging across Iraq. And as someone who spent a lot of time there, with other men and women who invested in that mission, it was a very difficult moment to see the black flag of ISIS fly. And what President Trump did was untie the hands of warfighters. He changed the rules of engagement, untied the hands of warfighters, and allowed them to complete their mission and crush ISIS. It has not just tactical implications, operational and strategic implications, how you allow warfighters to go about winning and fighting their wars. President Trump understands that, and within the laws of war and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, we are going to unleash warfighters to win wars so that wars don't drag on forever.
Okay, so when they mean unleash warfighters to win wars, what he really means is just kind of indiscriminate violence and the attempt to... This is just like a fascist logic, right? Which is like, oh, we're being held back by the fact we don't kill kids. But in reality, we don't intentionally kill kids, right? Like, oh, you should just let us kill all the kids. When in reality, what happens is that creates long-term strategic enemies because we have no interest being over there. So you're just going to create more and more and more enemies in a Hydra fashion. And then that leads you to one of two positions. Either you go, okay, our indiscriminate violence is creating more enemies, therefore we must exterminate everyone, or you suffer defeat. And so the logic of conservatism is spiraling toward the logic of genocide, the logic of exterminationism.
Our generation has seen.
So are you rejecting Title 18 and Title 42, I think, also has provisions that incorporate the Geneva Convention and the laws of armed combat? Are you saying that those laws should be repealed? That is the law of the land right now.
Senator, we have laws on the books from the Geneva Conventions into the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and then underneath that you have layers in which standard or temporary rules of engagement are put into place. We fight enemies also, Senator, as our generation understands, that play by no rules. They use civilians as human shields.
So are you saying
they target
that
women and children?
The Geneva
we don't
Convention
do that.
should not
we
be
follow
absurd?
rules. We follow rules, but we don't need burdensome rules of engagement that make it impossible for us to win these wars.
You're saying two different things. You're saying we follow rules, but we don't have to follow the rules in all cases. Is that correct?
Senator,
I'm making
an important tactical distinction that warfighters will understand. That there are the rules we swear an oath to defend, which are incredibly important, and this committee understands and helps set them. And
the
then
rules of engagement are commanders interpreting the Geneva Convention in the combat zone and giving clear and unambiguous instructions to their troops in order to find themselves within the confines of their interpretation of the laws that have been given to them by Congress. That's what rules of engagement are. The rules of engagement are the commander saying, okay, we're in an urban environment. When should you shoot at a car? Right? You see a civilian car in a city that you're occupying. When do you shoot at that car? Hegseth is saying any rules at all about shooting at that car is tying our hands. So he basically wants to make it legal for American troops to just shoot any civilian they see out of fear. That's what he's arguing for.
Or those echelons above reality from, corps to division to brigade to battalion, and by the time it trickles down to a company or a platoon or a squad level, you have a rules of engagement that nobody recognizes. And then it makes you incredibly difficult to actually do your job on the battlefield. That's the kind of assessment and look an Army major will give to this process if I was confirmed to be the Secretary of Defense.
Your quote is,
true understanding
your
of that.
quote in 2024, our boys should not fight by rules written by dignified men in mahogany rooms 80 years ago. That would be the Geneva Convention. America should fight by its own rules, and we should fight to win or not go in at all. Are you saying that the Geneva Convention provisions, which clearly outlaw torture of prisoners, should not apply in the future?
Senator, how we treat our wounded, how we treat our prisoners, the applications of the Geneva Conventions are incredibly important. But we would all have to acknowledge that the way we fought our wars back when the Geneva Conventions were written are a lot different than the asymmetric, non-conventional environment of counterinsurgency that I confronted in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was the senior counterinsurgency instructor in Afghanistan. My job was to understand how the Taliban and al-Qaeda operated so that NATO units coming in could be informed of what was happening. They knew our rules of engagement, and when they were more restrictive, they took advantage of them, and it put our men and women in a more dangerous and difficult place.
And you believe
for future wars we fight, we need to have someone atop the Pentagon, sir, who understands how those ripple effects
Well, I just want to understand your position. Your position is torture is okay. Is that correct? Waterboarding, torture is no longer prohibited. given the circumstances of whatever war we're in. Is that correct?
Senator, that is not what I said. I've never been party to torture. We are a country that fights by the rule of law, and our men and women always do. And yet we have too many people here in air-conditioned offices that like to point fingers at the guys in dark and dangerous places, the gals in helicopters in enemy territory who are doing things that people in Washington, D.C. would never dare to do, or send, in many cases.
In one of your interviews, you said they're willing to do this. You're talking about Donald Trump and Senator Cruz. They're willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. Are you okay with waterboarding?
Senator, the law of the land is that waterboarding is not legal.
So the statement that you made, you now recant. Is that correct? They are willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. You expressed that with approval.
Senator, I'm very familiar with that as a concept, having spent a year at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, guarding 700 of those that attacked us on 9/11.
I just want to be clear. Are we going to abide by the Geneva Convention and the prohibitions on torture, or are we not? Is it going to depend on the circumstances?
As I've stated multiple times, the Geneva Conventions are what we base ours. But what an American first national security policy is not going to do is hand its prerogatives over to international bodies that make decisions about how our men and women make decisions on the battlefield. America First understands we send Americans for a clear mission and a clear objective. We equip them properly for that objective.
Right,
we give them everything they need, and then we stand behind them with the rules of engagement that allow them to fight decisively to defeat America's enemies, which is why we say
I just have a few
quietly and
seconds left,
peacefully
Mr.
in this
Hegseth, if you could. I was very disturbed in your opening statement where you talked about the priorities that you have. We will work with our partners and allies to deter aggression in the Indo-Pacific from the communist Chinese. There's not a single mention in this statement about Ukraine or Russia. Is this code for we're going to abandon Ukraine?
Senator, the president, that's a presidential level policy decision. He's made it very clear that he would like to see a end to that conflict. We know who the aggressor is. We know who the good guy is. We'd like to see it as advantageous for the Ukrainians as possible, but that war needs to come to an end.
You talk a lot about deterrence of China. I would submit that Xi Jinping is watching what we do very carefully. If we abandon Ukraine, that would be the strongest signal possible to Xi Jinping that he can take Taiwan without significant resistance from this country.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Scott of Florida.
Okay, and then what? Let's imagine that happens. Taiwan becomes part of China, similar to Hong Kong or Macau, and then what? What happens for an American? What happens to our lives? Nothing? But what's the next step where it affects me? Like, go ahead. I mean, right now, I'm being smoked by wildfires that are out of control and with an underfunded firefighting service. That's causing me to get respiratory issues or cancer or whatever the fuck. Literally hundreds of billions of dollars of real estate and structures are being burned down. Millions of lives are being disrupted. I can see the direct effect of climate change right out of my fucking window. Where is this big Taiwan? Go ahead, tell me what happens next. Okay, Taiwan joins China. Then what? Then what? What's the big fear? What's the thing that's going to happen next that eventually actually affects an American? How many steps down the line before the first American is affected? Doesn't sound like there's one, man.
So I have a lot of respect for him and for everybody that puts on the uniform and serves in battle and has to lead people in battle, because being on a ship, that didn't happen to me, but I had a lot of friends that happened to
control the most important trade routes.
I've served on this committee for 6 years.
Guys, liberal defense policies explained.
To proceed was to get everyone in the one room.
Good thinking.
Okay, you're all right. I'll come straight to the point. This white paper is recommending we spend close to $400 billion over the forward estimates. Now, at some point, the PM is going to be asked a very simple question. In order to protect us from which enemy?
It's so hard to say.
400 billion, pick one.
A regional player.
Specifically, Colonel?
An Indo-Pacific regional player.
More specifically?
Indo-Asia Pacific.
That's broader. Who are you leaving out? Europe? Yeah, I sort of need a country.
Or an unaligned player.
No, a country.
One that might threaten us. Just one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to raise tensions.
Where?
In this room.
You know what? I'll name one and you just nod. China. Yeah? Okay. And what exactly are we protecting?
Strategic interests.
Specifically, Colonel?
Indo-Pacific strategic
Again,
interests.
Brigadier, really specifically.
Indo-Asia Pacific strategic
You know what?
interests.
I'll say it and then you nod. Our trade routes. Yeah? And who is our #1 trading partner?
Shall we use the nod system?
Sure. China? So under this scenario, we're spending close to $30 billion a year to protect our trade with China from China. And that doesn't strike anyone at this table as odd?
That's what a chatter literally just said to me. He was like, if China controls the most important trade routes, it's like the most important trade routes to China?
That mattered. But suddenly we re-inject DEI and critical race theory, dividing truth.
Oh, yeah. And if you want more, by the way, the critical race theory stuff, we're pausing because we're going to come back to that. This is it in a nutshell. Former Prime Minister of Australia.
Underlying all this stuff about the need of nuclear power is the idea that China has either threatened us or will threaten us. Now, this is a distortion and it's untrue. China does not threaten the United States. Nobody can threaten the United States. It's got 10,000 kilometres of sea between the Chinese coast and California. It's got the Atlantic Ocean on the other side. It has a massive country with in space, land mass and friends in Canada on the north and Mexico on the south, and the greatest armaments in all history. China has committed, in the eyes of the United States, the great sin of internationalism. And what is that sin? To develop an economy as big as the United States. That's the sin. They've got as big as the US. The Americans will never condone or accept a state as large as them, and that's what China presents. China's mere presence. I mean, they would have preferred they remain in poverty, 20% of humanity forever. But the fact that China is now, an industrial economy larger than the United States, larger, according to the IMF, 20% larger, they say, hang on, this is not in the playbook. This is not in the playbook. What an affront. This is about the maintenance of US strategic hegemony in Asia. Now, this is a country which has no land in the metropolitan zone of Asia. There's no US in Asia. It's 10,000 kilometres across the Pacific to the coast of California. So they are not a metropolitan Asian power, but they claim to be and wish to be the primary strategic power in Asia. So what are the Chinese supposed to say to that? Oh, that's okay. We've been here 4,000 years. We've developed, we've been subjugated by every bugger known to man. We've developed a decent economy, a decent standard of living, shelter, accommodation, education, that's our sin, is it? That's our sin. And we've got to be superintended by your Navy, by the US Navy. Could you just imagine if the Chinese Blue Water Navy decided to do their sightseeing 6 miles off the coast of California? Could you imagine the brouhaha that would go on?
Hegseth's leadership record at Concerned Veterans for America. The first letter submitted by Mr. Darren Selnick, a senior advisor at CFA, stated that there's been no better leader, policy champion, or fighter for the military and veterans than Pete. He was instrumental in 2014 and 2017 in ensuring that veterans had healthcare choice. The second letter submitted by Mr. Kason Spiro, digital media director of CVA from 2015 to 2017, stated, Pete brought incredible energy, focus, and a clear vision to the organization and showed everything that the team accomplished together.
And I similarly asked to submit to the record a letter from Paul J. Roberts, retired Colonel, U.S. Army Special Forces, speaking to the unwavering integrity of Mr. Hegseth. Is there objection? Without objection, those three will be admitted. Senator Scott.
All right. First, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you, Senator.
And thank you for being willing to serve our nation. I served in the Navy. I'm really proud of my dad. He was crazy. He did off-road combat jumps with the 82nd Airborne. He, after that, survived all that and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And what they went through, it was hell. So I have a lot of respect for him and for everybody that puts on the uniform and serves in battle and has to lead people in battle. Because being on a ship, that didn't happen to me, but I had a lot of friends that happened to, and it clearly happened to my dad. I've served on this committee for 6 years, 2 years under President Trump, and the past 4 under President Joe Biden. I've seen how the Biden-Harris administration pushed the DoD to prioritize wokeness over being the most lethal military force in the world.
Wokeness!
It's our readiness, our national security, and our ability to recruit people who are willing to put their lives on the line for our country. Can you talk about some of the changes we can make to improve recruitment and rebuild our military into the most lethal force in the world?
First of all, Senator, thank you for the question. Thank you for your time. I think the first and most important thing we could have done is elect Donald Trump as the new commander-in-chief, because past is prologue. Our warfighters understand what kind of commander-in-chief they're going to get in President Donald Trump, someone who stands behind them, someone who gives them clear missions, someone who ends wars decisively, and the issue of Ukraine was mentioned, and ensures new wars are not started. There was a minor incursion under Barack Obama into Crimea, followed by nothing under President Trump, followed by an all-out assault by Vladimir Putin into Ukraine under the Biden administration. That did not happen under Donald Trump. Donald Trump managed the Taliban. Under the Biden administration, Afghanistan collapsed tragically, ending the lives of 13 at Abbey Gate, who we remember every single day, and no one was held accountable for that. Chinese spy balloons were flying over the country. None of that happened under Donald Trump, and our warfighters understand that. So there's no better recruiter, in my mind, for our military than President Donald Trump. My job is to come alongside him, should I be confirmed, and continue to emphasize his emphasis on warfighting, on getting anything that doesn't contribute to meritocracy out of how decisions are made inside the Pentagon. What gender you are, what race you are, your views on climate change, or whether you are a person of conscience and your faith should have no bearing on whether you get promoted or whether you're selected to go to West Point or whether you graduate from Ranger School. The only thing that should matter is how capable are you at your job? How excellent are you at your job? I served in multi-ethnic units in every place that I worked. Every place that I served. None of that mattered. But suddenly, we re-inject DEI and critical race theory, dividing troops into different categories, oppressor and oppressed, in ways that they otherwise just want to work together. That's why I've pointed out before, and I'll say it again, because I'm sure it'll be quoted to me at some point. The dumbest phrase in military history is our unity is our strength. No, our shared purpose is our strength. Our shared mission is our strength. We are one DoD community of all, committed to the same mission. Has nothing to do with your background. Has to do with what your commitment is to the country. And that is my solemn pledge to every single person that would put the uniform on and reflects President Trump's priorities as well, Senator.
Thank you. You know, we talked a little bit about the fact the Pentagon can't do an audit. Can you talk about, I mean, to me, I've run big businesses. It's all about accountability. If you want to get an audit done, you can get an audit done. You might get a letter saying there's things you have to fix, but it all goes to accountability, and we haven't had it. So can you talk about how you bring accountability to the table, what you've done in the past, and what you're going to do with regard to bringing accountability to the Pentagon?
I meant it when I said it in the opening statement, Senator. I know what I don't know. I know I've never run an organization of 3 million people with a budget of $850 billion. But what I do know is that I've led men and women. I've led people. And it's leadership of people and motivation of people and a clear vision of people where you build a team, cast that vision, empower people properly. I want smarter and more capable people around me than me. And you will get that at the department. I cast the clear vision, build the plan, work it. We set the metrics, and everyone is held accountable. I know our incoming businessman president believes in accountability and holding people accountable. That will happen at the Pentagon. I mean, this has been a problem for a long time. Secretary Rumsfeld gave a speech on September 10th, 2001 that's mostly forgotten. But it was about the need for acquisition reform, cutting tail to give to teeth, the warfighters. And then 9/11 happened. And these are problems that have been persistent for a long time. But now we have new threats. And we need the urgency of this moment. As you said, Mr. Chairman, the most dangerous moment we've been since the end of the Cold War and possibly since World War II. The urgency to do everything possible to get the capabilities into the hands of warfighters, emergency powers, Defense Production Act, whatever it takes, and an audit is certainly part of it.
Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this job? What drives you?
You have 30 seconds.
Because I love my country, Senator, and I've dedicated my life to the warfighters. People see me as someone who hosts a morning show on television, but people that really know me know where my heart's at. It's with the guys in this audience who've had my back, and I've had theirs. We've been in some of the darkest and most difficult places you can ever be in. You come back a different person, and only by the grace of God am I here before you today.
The darkest places on earth because we attacked.
For them.
Because we supported Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Hegseth,
that's why they're the darkest place.
Thank you for your service. So if you're confirmed as Secretary of Defense, you will oversee our military, including about 250,000 women who currently serve on active duty
this
in the Army, the Navy, the Air
bullshit
Force,
is
the Space
just
Forces,
fucking
and the Marines.
worthless.
And I have serious concerns that your behavior toward women disqualifies you from serving in this role. Now, I've been trying to get answers from you for quite some time on this. You haven't wanted to meet or to answer any of my questions, so we'll just have to do it here and dive in. I want to pick up on some of the questions asked by Senator Shaheen and Gillibrand and Hirono, and I just want to make sure we have a list of some of the facts that I think are undisputed. I'm not going to talk about anonymous sources. I'm just going to quote you directly. We've got the video. We've got it in print. So going back to January 2013, you told a Fox News interviewer that women in the military simply couldn't measure up to men in the military, saying that allowing women to serve in combat roles would force the military to lower the bar. You picked up on that same theme in 2015, making remarks on Fox News, referring to women in combat as, quote, it would erode standards. June 2024, you said on Ben Shapiro's podcast, quote, women shouldn't be in combat all. And then, of course, we've talked about it in 2024. You published a book, and you say on page 26 of your book, we need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units. Page 48 of your book, you claim that women should not be in combat roles because men are distracted by women. And then 10 weeks ago, you appeared on the Sean Ryan Show and said, I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. Now, I presume you recall making all these statements?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the article you're pointing to in 2013, but it underscomes my argument completely, because in that 2013 argument, I was talking about standards.
No,
standards are what it's always been about,
let's not have this same fight
Always
again.
been about Senate
I've quoted
standards.
you directly. We've got the video. We're happy to show it. But I want to be clear here. For 12 years, you were quite open about your views, and your views were consistently the same. Women are inferior soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and guardians. And in case anyone missed the...
Remember when Livs made a whole show about mocking Space Force? And then it's now wrapped around to, we love our guardians, we love our Space Force, thank you for your service! You see how quickly the right-wing shit just slides into the Democratic Party? Just like, whew, light speed. How dare you disrespect our guardians? That's what the Space Force members are called, guardians.
Comment. You declared that, quote, some of our greatest warriors are women, and you support having them serve in combat. Now, that is a very, very big about face in a very, very short period of time. So help me understand, Mr. Hegseth, what extraordinary event happened in that 32-day period that
you guys think
made
is it
you
quiet?
change the
It seems
core
good volume to me.
values you had expressed for the preceding 12 years?
Senator, again, I very much appreciate you bringing up my comments from 2013, because for me, this issue has always been about standards. And unfortunately, because of some of the people that have been in political power for the last 4 years, priorities other than standards, lethality, and meritocracy have driven decision-making.
I'm quoting you from the podcast. Women shouldn't be in combat at all. Where is the reference to standards? That they should be there if they can carry, if they can run? I don't see that at all, Mr. Hegseth. What I see is that there's a 32-day period in which you suddenly have another description about your views of women in the military. And I just want to know, what changed in the 32 days that the song you sang is not the song you come in here today to sing?
Senator, the concerns I have and the concerns that many have had, especially in ground combat units, is that in pursuit of certain percentages or quotas, standards have been changed. And that makes the combat more difficult
Let me make a
for everybody
suggestion
involved.
about what happened in that 32 days. You got a nomination from President Trump. Now, I've heard of deathbed conversions, but this is the first time I've heard of a nomination conversion. And I hope you understand that many women serving in the military right now might think that if you can convert so rapidly your long-held and aggressively pursued views in just 32 days, that 32 days after you get confirmed, maybe you'll just reverse those views and go back to the old guy who said, straight up, women do not belong in combat. Now, Mr. Hegseth, you have written that after they retire, generals should be banned from working for the defense industry for 10 years. You and I agree on the corrosive effects of the revolving door between the Pentagon and defense contractors. It's something I would have liked to talk with you about if you'd come and been willing to visit with me. But the question I have for you on this is, will you put your money where your mouth is and agree that when you leave this job, you will not work for the defense industry for 10 years?
Senator, it's not even a question I've thought about, because it's not
about
one
it right now.
It's not one, my motivation for this job
I understand
has never
that. I
been
just
about
need
what
a
could
yes or no
conceivably
here.
come next.
Time is short. I just need a yes or no.
I would consult with the president about what the policy should be
In
at the Defense
other
Department.
words, you're quite sure that every general who serves should not go directly into the defense industry for 10 years. But you're not willing to make that same pledge?
I'm not a general, Senator.
You'll be the one, let us just be clear, in charge of the generals. So you're saying sauce for the goose, but certainly not sauce for the gander?
I would want to see what the policy of the president is.
Oh, I'll bet you would.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your hard work and your committee's hard work, Mr. Chairman. This has gone well. I'd like to submit this letter, topic conduct at Vets for Freedom for Hegseth. I'd like to submit that for the record, please.
Without objection.
Mr. Hegseth, thanks for being here today and with your family. I know this is tough. That's what it's all about, though. You're a tough guy. Been here for a while. Never seen this many people that here for a support of a nominee. That's impressive. I met with a lot of them yesterday, and they are very passionate. So thank you for willing to take this on, and congratulations on your nomination. I'm worried about recruiting. I mean, we can look at everything out there and talk about all these things, these narratives. At the end of the day, I came from a team sport where the players actually won the games. And that's what's going to happen here. You're not going to win the game. Now, you're going to set the precedent. You're going to get the blame or the credit, but there's going to be people that's going to be under you that's going to set the precedent for the future of our country. Now, the war games that we play on our computers with our adversaries right now, for us, it don't look good because our military, we're in trouble. Our whole country's in trouble. Thank God President Trump got elected November the 5th. We couldn't have kept down this same path. That could not happen. I met with a couple of generals this summer. Coach, we're spending more money on transgender restrooms than we are coverings for $100 million airplanes. That's not acceptable. We can't do that. That's not what this is about. Met with a couple of Navy SEALs not too long ago. They just got back from crawling around in the mud and the muck, overseas, unknown places. Couldn't tell you where they've been, carrying a weapon, obviously protecting us and our allies. And the first week they're back. What'd they do? They had to go through a week of DEI training. Both are now out. They give it up. It was embarrassing to them of what they had to do.
So in other words, he wants people to be sexually harassed. He wants people to use racial slurs. Like, just taking a week to be like, hey, man, don't say this, don't do this. That's against the rule. It's going to make people uncomfortable. It's going to cause fights. It's going to cause, people come from different, like, our country is very large and people have different expectations of what is permissible behavior. And you need to set a professional standard. And a week or two talking about that is called a professional setting. And members of the military are not college educated. These are people that many of them don't have college degrees. Many of them, are coming from, they're behind in a lot of academic or other social development. And the military is there to take an American and make them into a professional member of the military. Like, that is supposed to be the part of the training. The idea that you don't want that is going to damage readiness, which ultimately, you know what? Like, I've now come around. Do it. Yeah. More dissension, more lowered readiness. Yeah. More intra-military fights. Less effectiveness. Lower combat capability. Lower recruitment. Honestly, they should cut the pay too. Why not?
We've lost all sight of what we're doing in our military. Lost all sight. It starts with leadership and it starts with recruiting. Why would a young man, used to when I was growing up, if you couldn't afford to go to college, you had the opportunity to go to the military where you could learn a trade. You could learn, you could make a living for your family and eventually possibly get an education. That was a good alternative. We've forgotten that. We've forgotten it. We can't give up on our young people. Young people are our number one commodity in this country, and they're the ones that's going to live and die for the freedom of this country in the future. So, again, thank you for taking this on. Recruiting. Our service academies are meant to serve as our primary commissioning source of officers. It now appears that they are a breeding ground for leftist activists and champions of DEI and critical theory. Now, not all, but some, and some is way too much. How are we going to eliminate this, Mr. Hegseth? How are we going to get this back on track to where we grow our leaders? I had a young man that forever he wanted to go to West Point. I got him a nomination, I got him accepted, and he turned it down. He says, Coach, I'm not getting involved with that mess. How are we going to overcome this?
Senator, thank you for the question. And I think it comes down to leadership, clear leadership. From President Trump through me, should I be nominated? And that's what soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians see. is clear leadership. It says, this is what we believe. This is the mission we're going to give you. Here's the equipment we're going to give you, and here's how we're going to support you. Because the military, at a lot of levels, Senator, has been for generations a family business. My grandfather served. My father served. I served. My daughter served. That chain has started to break, with generations of people my age and older talking to their kids and grandkids, wondering, pondering, do I want them to serve? Will my country use them responsibly? When that kind of doubt is cast, you get serious recruiting problems like we do right now. You get questions about whether I want my son or daughter to follow my path in West Point, which I've heard multiple times. Would I want my... And so you have to rip, root, and branch the politics and divisive policies out of these institutions and then focus them on creating and preparing actual future military leadership. West Point traditionally is focused on engineering, and rightfully so. Because in our fighting forces across all services, we need the best and brightest minds in engineering, in addition to military studies. That's what I did at ROTC at Princeton, military science. That, and we need more uniformed members going back into West Point, the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, as a tour to teach with their wisdom of what they've learned in uniform, instead of just more civilian professors that came from the same left-wing woke universities that they left, and then try to push that into service
That's
academies.
where you
when
went,
that changes,
bitch.
Senator, I truly believe under Donald Trump, we will have a recruiting renaissance. That sends signals to the world, to our enemies and our allies alike, that America's back. And thankfully, then we have the men and women of our country willing to want to serve.
Thank you. And it's about attitude, too. And I love your attitude. You've got to be motivated. You've got to understand that people, they will hook up with you. They will understand and learn under their leaders. Why would you fight for a country that you don't love? That's what I keep hearing from a lot of our college kids that they're getting from these woke universities that they go to. Now, and I worked at a lot of them. That is one of the excuses I get from our kids. We've got to break that. Another one, according to the Pentagon, between 2001 and 2024, the number of civilian employees in the Office of the Secretary of Defense has nearly doubled from 1,500 to 3,000. Civilians on Joint Chiefs has increased from 191 to almost 1,000. Our military end strength goes down. Our staff numbers are exploding. What are you going to do about that?
Senator, we're going to address that. We won World War II with 7 four-star generals. Today, we have 44 four-star generals. There's an inverse relationship between the size of staffs and victory on the battlefield. We don't need more bureaucracy at the top. We need more warfighters empowered at the bottom. So it's going to be my job working with those that we hire and those inside the administration to identify those places where fat can be cut so it can go toward lethality.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hegseth, welcome to this committee.
Thank you.
You know, we have far too much partisanship in our country right now. I think it's eating away at the fabric of what has always made this country great, about bringing people together from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of experiences. And we know that in our motto, together as one, we are strong. And so we in this committee, and certainly I speak for myself, but I think I speak for many of my colleagues, want to take partisanship out of this proceeding as much as we can. I'm not naive. It's out there. I get it. But we've got to try to take that out. And I want you to know that as a member of this committee, I have voted in a bipartisan way for secretaries of defense. I voted for 2 secretaries of defense when Donald Trump was previously president. We had those 2. We had, I think, 5 total secretaries of defense during that 4-year period. So we want to keep that in mind as to what we might see in this coming administration. But I voted, and we voted by a big margin for those folks as well. But part of that was the process and having an opportunity to get to know the person and understand their qualifications and understand the standards. You know, I made repeated requests to meet with you prior to this meeting. I know many of my other colleagues also wanted to meet with you. I did that with the other nominees that I was happy to vote for. I thought they were highly qualified individuals and true professionals. And yet I could never get a meeting with you. Was there a reason you were afraid to have one-on-one meetings with some of my colleagues before the hearing?
Senator, I know there was a great deal of outreach to multiple offices. Schedules get full. There's a lot going on.
I was ready.
And I welcome the opportunity, pending my schedule, to have an opportunity to sit down.
I was ready. It would have been so much better to have that opportunity to talk beforehand. I think that's a big mistake, and it doesn't set us on a good course when you refuse to meet with people and have a professional conversation about the huge challenges that we face at the Department of Defense. My colleagues, the folks who introduced you and others, the chairman has mentioned about the management of the DoD is a concern, cost overruns, delays on weapon systems. We need strong management at the Department of Defense, first and foremost. We've got to have someone who's going to grab the reins and give the taxpayers value for having the most lethal fighting force in the world that defends freedoms, but we've got to do it in an efficient way. I've heard about the jobs you've had in the past. Let's just talk about qualifications. I know you had 2 previous positions. How many people reported to you in those positions?
Senator, at Vets for Freedom, we were a small upstart. Our focus was
just the number,
working
please.
on Capitol Hill, going back to the battlefield to
Just the
support
number.
warfighters.
Just the number, please.
We probably had 8 to 10 full-time staff and lots of volunteers.
So you had 8. Has there been any other? We've heard about the 2, and certainly there's been a lot of talk about the mismanagement, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just curious. I won't go into that. Just curious. So you had 8 there. What's the largest number of people you've ever supervised or had in an organization in your career?
Not 3 million. Senator.
No, I don't expect that. Very few people have ever had that experience. But how many? It's a straight up question.
I think we had over 100 full-time staff at Concerned Vets for America, roughly, with thousands of volunteers.
So 100
I was
people.
also a headquarters company commander, which would have been
that's fine.
a couple of hundred. Nothing remotely near the size of the Defense Department. I would acknowledge that.
Actually, not remotely near even a medium-sized company in America, let alone a big company in America, especially a major corporation. And we're hiring you to be the CEO of one of the most complex, largest organizations in the world. We're the board of directors here. I don't know of any corporate board of directors that would hire a CEO for a major company if they came and said, you know, I supervised 100 people before.
Do you see what I mean?
They'd ask you, well, what kind of experiences you had? We need innovation. Can you give me an experience or your actual experience of driving innovation in an organization? Give me an example of where you have done that.
Oh my goodness, Senator, absolutely. At Concerned Veterans for America, we created the Fixing Veterans Healthcare Task Force, a bipartisan task force that never been done before, to create policy, to drive policy change on Capitol Hill that organizations fought ferociously against. We got the VA Accountability Act passed and the Mission Act passed in a way that a nonprofit of our size, veterans organization, has never done. And that's testified in all the letters that we put forward to the committee, which are on the record.
I have limited time. Thank you for that. Give me an example of where you've driven down cost. I've heard the examples that Senator Blumenthal gave. The cost was a real problem for you in your 50-person organization that you actually raised a lot less than what you actually spent. Did you?
This is the Democrats in a nutshell. Instead of just being like, you're a warmonger, you want us to have more wars, you're unqualified and stupid. I'm going to talk about your dumb nonprofit not making money some year. Like, does that matter? But Democrats, like, whenever they're not talking about, and the reason why Democrats on this committee don't talk about why he's a warmonger is because they support all the same wars, right? Like, they want a war with China. They want a war with Russia. They want a war with Iran. They want a war, supporting ISIS. They want to support, Islamic extremists in Libya. They want to go after, the West African decolonization movements, right? Like, they want to see Western hegemony. They want to see us dominating the rest of the third world. So they don't have any real opposition, but they have to play act like they do.
Drive costs down if in a 50-person organization?
Sorry about that. Sorry for going quiet there for a second, chat. I was downloading the Little Red Book app. We finally found our short form content. Little Red Book, Red Note. We're doing it.
What we need in the hands of our warfighters better change because we're not doing it well right now.
It better, and we need people who have experience actually doing that. You talk about standards. Again, I'm going to go back to a CEO of the most complex organization in the world. I don't think there's a board of directors in America that would hire you as a CEO with the kind of experience you have on your resume. You talk about standards. You talk about raising or lower. We have a problem of standards in the DoD, and we have to raise standards for the men and women who serve. Do you think that the way to raise the minimum standards of the people who serve us is to lower the standards for the Secretary of Defense? That we have someone who has never managed an organization more than 100 people is going to come in and manage this incredibly important organization and do it with a professionalism and has no experience that they can tell us that they have actually done that? I have real problems with that. This is not about other issues that are brought up. They're all very important. I'm just about trying to get things done, managing efficiently, and having the best people who have demonstrated that in a large organization. And I'm sorry, but I don't see that in your background. There are a lot of other things you can do very well. You're a capable person, but you have not convinced me that you're able to take on this tremendous responsibility with a complex organization and having little or no significant management experience.
Senator, I'm grateful to be hired by one of the most successful CEOs in American history. Should I be confirmed?
I'm sorry for screaming and laughing, but what do you mean? He's got 3 bankrupt casinos. What, Trump Water, Trump Airline, Trump Steaks? The fuck are you talking about? He got handed a hotel for free in Washington, D.C., and the only reason it made money is because he was president. Like, what the... and so every dignitary that wanted to bribe Trump rented rooms there.
I was misinformed. Senator Mullen,
Okay.
you're recognized.
Caught me totally off guard there. I'd like to submit for the record signatures by 32 members of the House of Representatives who are veterans. The signatures call on the Senate to honor the constitutional duty of advising consent by conducting a fair, thorough confirmation process that evaluates his nomination solely on the substance and merits. His distinguished military service, academic credentials, and a bold vision for revitalizing the national defense. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record.
Without objection.
You know, there's a lot of talk going about talking about qualifications and then about us hiring him if we are the board. But there's a lot of senators here I wouldn't have on my board because there is no qualifications except your age, and you got to be living in the state and you're a citizen of the United States to be a senator. Other than the fact we got to convince a lot of people to vote for us. And then when we start talking about qualifications for if you're qualified for it, could the chairman tell me what the qualifications are for the Secretary of Defense? Mr. Chairman, could you tell me what the qualifications are for the Secretary of Defense?
I'd be happy
I'll read
for
it.
you to do that. Yeah.
Let me read it for you because I Googled
I was getting some advice from my second in command.
Yeah, but I'm just making a point because there's a lot about qualifications, and I think it's so hypocritical of senators, especially on the other side of the aisle, be talking about his qualifications, not being able to lead
when
the secretary or be the Secretary of Defense, and yet your qualifications aren't any better. You guys aren't any more qualified to be the senator than I'm qualified to be the senator, except we're lucky enough to be here. But let me read you what the qualifications of the
qualifications to be a senator is you get elected. He's not being elected, he's being appointed. And so they're giving advice and consent on whether he should be appointed. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, this is the level of conservative debate. Like, even this guy behind him is like, that's not a very strong point.
Because I Googled it, and I Googled it and went through a lot of different sites, and really it's hard to see. But in general, the U.S. Secretary of Defense position is filled by a civilian. That's it. If you have served in the U.S. Army Forces and have been in the service for...
so in other words, technically, you could take someone off the street. Honestly, I Googled it. I Googled it! Smartest conservative.
You have to be retired for at least 7 years, and Congress can weigh that. And then there's questions that the senator from Massachusetts brought up about serving on a board inside the military industry, and yet your own secretary that you all voted for, Secretary of Austin, we had to vote on a waiver because he stepped off the board of Raytheon. But I guess that's okay because that's a Democrat Secretary of Defense.
Do you see how, by the way, this is a great point. The corruption of the Democrats is used to justify the corruption of the Republicans. And Joe Biden is a fucking disgusting rat and genocidal warmonger freak.
Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job? And don't tell me you haven't seen it because I know you have. And then how many senators do you know have got a divorce before cheating on their wives? Did you ask them to step down? No, but it's for show. You guys make sure you make a big show and point out the hypocrisy because a man's made a mistake. And you want to sit there and say that he's not qualified? Give me a joke. I mean, it is so ridiculous that you guys hold yourself as this higher standard and you forget you got a big plank in your eye. We've all made mistakes. I've made mistakes. And Jennifer, thank you for loving him through that mistake.
She was the mistake.
The only reason why I'm here and not in prison
she was the mistake.
Is because my wife loved me too.
She's like, thank you for cheating on his wife with him. Thank you for fucking him when he was married to another woman. Thank you for doing
somebody
that.
That thought I was perfect. And for whatever reason, you love Pete, and I don't know why. But just like our Lord and Savior forgave me, my wife's had to forgive me more than once too, and I'm sure you've had to forgive him too. And so thank you. So before I go down this rabbit hole again, tell me something about your wife that you love.
She's the smartest, most capable, loving, humble, honest person I've ever met. In addition to being incredibly beautiful. Don't forget about your kids. I'm supposed to talk about my kids?
No, well, she's also the mother.
Oh, an amazing mother.
Yes.
Of our blended family of 7 kids.
Brother, I'm pulling you along. I'm trying to help you here. You know, do you believe that you're going to be running the Secretary or the Department of Defense by yourself?
Senator, absolutely not. Just as President Trump is assembling his cabinet, I look forward and already am in the process of building one of the best possible teams you can imagine with decades and decades of experience outside of the Pentagon, driving innovation and excellence, and also inside the building, knowing how to make it happen.
So in your organizations that you did have the privilege of running, did you have a board that you?
In both organizations, we had a board, yes.
Okay, and what did you do with that board? What kind of decisions did you make with them?
Those boards provided oversight and insight into decision-making.
They all have special, unique sets that maybe filled gaps that you're not the expertise in?
Yes, sir.
So do you believe you're capable of surrounding yourself with capable individuals that you're going to be able to run those same ideas by and surround yourself with people that are smarter and better equipped in maybe areas that you don't necessarily carry those expertise with?
Senator, the only reason I've had success in life, to include my wonderful wife, is because of people more capable around me and having the self-confidence to empower them and say, hey, run with the ball, run with the football, take it down the field. We'll do this together. I don't care who gets the credit. And in this case, that's how the Pentagon will be run.
Let's end with this, Mr. Chairman, about the qualifications. You got a man who has literally put his butt on the line, who served 20 years in the service, multiple deployments, has heard the bullets crack over the top of his head, has been willing to go into combat, been willing to see
who gives a fuck
die for this country, and he's willing to still put himself through this. His wife is willing to still stand beside him, knowing he wasn't perfect, knowing that all this was going to be
which one
brought up, and he's still willing to serve the country. What other qualifications does he need?
You know what I would ask? I would be like, do you wash your hands? I was going to shake your hand, but I heard you hadn't washed your hand in 10 years. I didn't want to get shit on my hands. So I think Hegseth will be confirmed. Yes.
That'll yield back.
Thank you, Senator Mullen. Senator Duckworth. And again, we really are going to strictly enforce the rule about no demonstrations or noise. Distinguished ranking member.
Just a point of personal privilege to make a correction. The reason that General Austin required a waiver was not because of his participation in a corporate enterprise. It was because he did not have 7 years of interruption between his service and his appointment. Second point is that if any of us were appointed as Secretary of Defense, we would be subject to the same types of questions. And the case in point is Senator John Tower was nominated for Secretary of Defense. It was discovered by his colleagues that his behavior was not commensurate with the responsibilities despite his service, and he was voted down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Duckworth, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also, Secretary Mattis had to have this waiver as well. Mr. Hegseth, this hearing is about whether you are qualified to be Secretary of Defense, and one of the qualifications, to answer my colleague's question, is to actually win the votes of every member of this committee and to be confirmed by the United States Senate. And you need to convince us that you're worthy of that vote, because the people of the state of Illinois voted for me to be their senator so that I could cast that vote when it comes to picking who is going to be the next Secretary of Defense. This hearing now seems to be a hearing about whether or not women are qualified to serve in combat, and not about whether or not you are qualified to be Secretary of Defense. And let me just say that the American people need a SecDef who's ready to lead on day one. You are not that person. Our adversaries watch closely during times of transition, and any sense that the Department of Defense that keeps us safe is being steered by someone who's wholly unprepared for the job puts America at risk, and I am not willing to do that. With that in mind, Mr. Hegseth, I want you to try to explain to the American people, this committee, who have to vote for you, and to our troops who are deployed around the world, why you are qualified to lead the Department of Defense. We already know that you've only led as large as a 200-person organization. We already know that you so badly mangled a budget that after you left, they had to bring in a forensic accountant to figure out what went wrong. And that the largest budget you ever managed was about $18 billion. You know, that is about 51,560 times lower than the Department of Defense budget of $825 billion. $16 million is 51,568 times smaller than the defense budget. Please describe to me, Mr. Hegseth, you talk about DOD passing an audit. Please describe to me a time or an organization when that you led underwent an audit, because you say you're going to hire smarter people than you to run this audit. I'm not asking you to be an accountant. I want you to be able to tell me what kind of guidance will be given to those employees, what will happen whether or not you pass that audit. Have you led an audit of any organization, yes or no? I don't want a long answer, yes or no. Have you led an audit of any organization of which you were in charge?
Senator, in both of the organizations I ran, we were always completely fiscally responsible.
Yes or no, did you lead an audit?
And the way
yes or no, did you lead an audit? Yes or no?
Completely
what are you afraid of? You can't answer this question. Yes or no, did you lead an audit? Do you not know this answer?
Senator, every part of my leadership of these organizations has been misrepresented
I will
from
take
top
that
to
as a no.
bottom.
What were the findings? So there were no findings because you've never led an audit. What guidance did you give the auditors? None, because you've never led an audit. Nobody expects you to be an accountant, Mr. Hegseth. What we expect is for you to understand the complexity of this Pentagon budget process that is absolutely necessary to outfit our warfighters. The Secretary of Defense is required to make quick decisions every single day. That, well, with high level.
My main concern with somebody like Pete Hegseth isn't the effectiveness of the American military. If I thought that Pete Hegseth would significantly damage the U.S. military, then I would be in favor of him being appointed. But what I fear is the problem with Pete is that he's going to advance the careers of fascists within the Department of Defense and put them in positions of power. And he's going to use the military against Americans, especially leftists, because they all recognize that it's not Democrats that are a threat to the Republican Party. It is people like me. So that's the concern. Like, if I just thought Pete was going to go in there and be an incompetent drunk, then I would support him. But he's not going to go in there and be an incompetent drunk. He's going to go in there and he's going to find fascists to attack me. And I know that sounds ridiculous. And it is ridiculous because am I really a threat? No. They have to invent enemies. So I'm going to root with the Dems. They're not going to block him, though, because the Republican Party has been disciplined by Trump. I mean, he won the presidency twice. You know, at a certain point, like the idea that Donald Trump isn't the Republican Party is just a laughable joke.
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of nations in that, but I know we have allies in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia and trying to work on submarines with them.
Mr. Hegseth, none of those countries are in ASEAN.
Across.
None of those 3 countries that you mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of negotiations. Listen, Mr. Hegseth, we ask our troops to go into harm's way all the time. We ask them to go into harm's way. And this behind me is a copy of the Soldier's Creed, a copy that usually hangs over my desk here in the Senate, and you should be familiar with it. It's the same copy that hung over my desk at Walter Reed every single day that I woke up and fought my way back because I wanted to go back and serve next to my buddies who'd saved my life. This same copy, these words, I repeat it over and over and over again. And let me read out 2 things to you, 2 sentences. I will always place the mission first, and I am disciplined, physically and mentally tough, trained and proficient in my warrior task. Mr. Hegseth, our troops follow these words every single day, and they man up and they pack their rucksacks and they go to war, and they deserve a leader who can lead them, not a leader who wants to lower the standards for himself while raising the standards for other people. And by the way, our troops already meet the standards. We ask troops to man that ship, fight that fire, fly that helicopter until their very last breath. And they do that every single day. They cannot be led by someone who's not competent to do the job. How can we ask these warriors to train and perform the absolute highest standards when you are asking us to lower the standards to make you the Secretary of Defense simply because you are buddies with our president-elect? And by the way, he has filed for bankruptcy 6 times. I'm not quite sure he's the kind of CEO you want to refer to as a successful businessman. Let me make it clear. You can't seem to grasp that there is no U.S. military as we know it without the incredible women that we serve. Women who've earned their place in their units. You have not earned your place as Secretary of Defense. You say you care about keeping our armed forces strong and that you like that our armed forces are meritocracy, then let's not lower the standards for you. You, sir, are a no-go at this station.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth.
He says, let's not lower the standards for you. I mean, that's true.
Mr. Brian Marriott,
he really isn't qualified.
Anyone who claimed that Pete mismanaged funds at Vets.
Like, if you look at most secretaries of defense, he would be the most unqualified and least experienced of all time.
I want to thank you for your leadership and your handling of this today. I think you're doing a great job. So I wanted to also submit, for the record, a letter submitted by Mr. Daniel Catlin, the former operations manager at Vets for Freedom. Mr. Catlin's letter states that Mr. Hegseth and Mr. Catlin conducted weekly meetings to meticulously review every dollar that the organization spent. Pete's hands-on approach and dedication to financial responsibility ensured that Vets for Freedom operated within its budget. Mr. Catlin's letters also states that Pete treated his staff with the utmost respect, regardless of race or gender. So I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Hegseth, congratulations on your nomination. Thanks for appearing before the committee today. I enjoyed meeting you in my office before Christmas, and I've enjoyed our friendship before that. You know, you stated in your advanced policy questions that the American people need to be informed, engaged, and inspired to join our military. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And we also have a problem, though, with obesity and falling academic standards. It's very concerning. We've talked about that before. So if confirmed, how would you approach increasing the number of Americans eligible to serve in the military, but without lowering standards?
Well, Senator, I think there are already, to the credit of, I believe, the Army and other services have now caught up to that, which have piloted programs that have had some success, that have allowed young Americans who want to serve in the military but can't necessarily pass the ASFAB or pass the APFT to get into basic training, an opportunity to get caught up, a preparatory class. Sure. Unfortunately, yes, we do have a problem of obesity in our country, not necessarily something that the, if I'm confirmed, Secretary of Defense is able to address. But I do think leading from the front matters. I do think having a Secretary of Defense that will go out and do PT with the troops matters, that has been out there and done that before. And hopefully that's a motivating factor for young people. But the reality of obesity and criminal backgrounds and medical problems have long been an issue of recruitment in America, unfortunately. What changed is the perception of military service because of the condition of the services, and frankly, because of, in some ways, the way our schools don't teach young people to love the country anymore. And if you don't love the country, why do you want to serve that country? That's a deeper problem. But all of those things need to be addressed to revive recruiting, and obesity is certainly a part of it.
Thank you for that. So I've had multiple conversations, young folks back in North Carolina, young men, young women, and we get to meet a lot of them. But, you know, I hear from some of these folks who I encourage to join the military. They say that they're concerned that it's become politicized. And if confirmed, would you commit to working with my office to address the military recruiting crisis and ensuring the military is focused on warfighting?
Senator, absolutely. Number one, from day one, with a mandate from the Commander-in-Chief, who received that mandate when Americans spoke out loudly and said, we want peace through strength, we want America first foreign policy, and we don't want political ideology driving decisions inside our Defense Department. That was clear. It's an infection that the American people are acutely aware of, which the men and women in this room have lived firsthand. I've lived it firsthand, and that's why it will be a priority. And I truly believe, and I'm humbled by this, the response we've already seen from young men and women who've decided to join the military when they had said, I wasn't going to. But seeing a Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, reassured them. Seeing the possibility, if confirmed, of a Secretary of Defense that would have their back, reassured them. And so in the first couple of months after President Trump's election, we have already seen, the numbers are there, a recruiting surge in all the services that I would welcome the opportunity to continue. And it's humbling to think that families across this country would have confidence in us to deliver for their young men and women. There's no more important task.
Thank you for that. So shifting gears a bit, I want to hear some of your thoughts on the growing fighter aircraft capacity gap with China and what this means for a potential fight in the Indo-Pacific. So if confirmed, what policy recommendations will you make to the President on procurement and maintenance of 4th and 5th generation fighters while we continue to research and develop 6th generation and collaborative combat aircraft?
Senator, that's a very important conversation, one that I've...
So they've seen success in recruiting, chat, and here's why. The story of this year's recruiting success largely comes down to two broad changes that all the services made in some fashion: loosening the rules on who could join and increasing the number of recruiters. Both the Army and Navy saw success this past year largely as a result of programs that were aimed squarely at allowing other disqualified candidates to still sign up and join the service. Instead, Army planners have shifted their focus to a series of pre-basic training programs designed to address the needs of applicants who have otherwise been disqualified from enlistment. The Future Soldier Preparatory Course, introduced as a pilot program in 2022, has emerged as a crucial strategy for alleviating the Army's recruitment challenges. So in other words, people are illiterate and out of shape, and they have criminal background problems. And so basically, in order for people to get into to make up for the fact that our education system is collapsing and our social system is collapsing, they now have to do what amounts to a remedial program before you can do basic training. This is a superpower, by the way. Nearly a quarter of all new Army recruits went through one of these two prep courses. Similarly, the Navy signed up 40,978 recruits. The Navy stood up its own pre-boot camp classes to help academically and fitness challenge recruits come up to standards before proceeding with basic training. So it's basic training. Basic training. The Navy took in 5,982 recruits who were in the lower score bracket of the ASFAB test, which is basically an intelligence test. Or it's like a, how do they describe it over here? Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. So they took people who basically failed the ASFAB, which is an incredibly easy test. I'm going to be honest. The policy announced at the end of 2022 allowed recruits to enter the Navy with low cumulative test scores as long as they scored within standards on the line scores or subjects that relate to occupation-specific topics such as general science, math, or mechanical comprehension. So in other words, sure, you may be completely stupid in almost every area, but did you do decent in one area? Okay, that's good enough. In all, these two programs netted the Navy 11,354 recruits, just over a quarter of their annual goal that likely wouldn't have otherwise been able to sign up. And there you have it, chat. They lowered the standards to get more people in. At the exact moment when Hegseth is saying that, he cares about standards, they're lowering the standards. Much of the credit in hearing the Air Force's enlisted goal was attributed to major reforms to service policies in recent years, ranging from allowing applicants to have a greater percentage of body fat, changing the service's existing hand and neck tattoo policy, and bringing back the enlisted college loan repayment policy. Allowing for up to 26% body fat for men and 36% for women allowed the nearly 5,200 recruits across the Air Force, Space Force, Air Force Reserve, and Air National Guard to join. Roughly 2,000 recruits were able to join by being accepted, but were awaiting a conditional waiver that was likely to be approved. Additionally, permitting airmen to have appropriate tattoos of certain sizes on the hands and neck brought in 660 new recruits. Bringing back the college repayment brought in 540 new troops. All right, let's keep going.
Do you think they deserve our support and assistance? I mean, your answers to these, they're too broad. People want to know, are you willing to support our veterans organizations that will help our veterans get every damn thing that they deserve
It's
because they signed on the dotted line
yeah,
to keep us safe, just like you did. I respect that. Will you?
Senator, with all due humility, I don't know that there's anyone in this room over the last 20 years that have worked harder to ensure that our veterans are taken care of. It has been a passion of my life, alongside with so many on this dais, to make sure that veterans receive, and it is a recruiting crisis.
But you said
when
that
veterans are not treated
dependent
well,
on the government.
they don't
You
want
said
their
veterans are
sons and daughters
dependent
to
on the
join.
government. Do you believe that veterans getting these benefits are dependent on the government, or do you believe it's a benefit they've earned and deserved through their service?
It's a
Are they
benefit they've
dependent?
earned and a hand up to
But
the
these are
next
your
chapter of their
words
life.
then. So you have again
Absolutely.
changed your position. Where you believe the veterans are dependent, now you believe they've earned and deserved it. I just think it's disrespectful to change that position. These are benefits that people may need throughout their life and may not know when they need them or how they're going to need them, and they need to be there when they do. Thank you. I'm going to move on to my next question. America's role in the world. Our alliances, the threats America's facing, they're serious, they're wide-ranging, from China to Russia to Iranian-backed terrorism. So do you agree with the National Defense Strategy that the U.S. cannot compete with China, Russia, and their partners alone, and certainly cannot win a war that way? And this is a quote from the National Defense Strategy. Is your interpretation that American first foreign policy is America alone? Does that include abandoning our allies and partners such as NATO, Taiwan, Israel, and others? And if we can't win alone, and we don't strengthen our strategic partnerships, I would say that position, your position, places on a strategic path to lose to our adversaries. So maybe you're okay with choosing that path for America. I want to know how you square that position with the positions you articulated in your book, where you wrote that NATO is at relic, at best a distraction, and should be scrapped and remade. Are you okay with sending us down a path where we can't win?
Senator, the world has had, our friends in the world have had no better ally. Our allies and partners have had no better friend than President Donald Trump, who's
I'm not talking
reinvigorated a
about
NATO
President
alliance,
Donald Trump.
who's
I'm
stood
talking about
behind
your
Israel
words.
in every way, in ways this administration has not. He has ensured that the NATO alliance has become far more robust. He worked
Donald Trump going to
with
stand
allies
behind
in the
Ukraine?
Pacific as well.
Is Donald Trump going to stand behind Ukraine? Are you going to stand behind Ukraine? You say he's the strongest president. President-elect Trump said he will end the war in Ukraine before he takes office. Okay, so less than a
I
week
think
before
something
he's
like 60% of Americans want the war in Ukraine to end. And I think similar numbers of Ukrainians want the war to end. Right now, the American government, both Trump and Biden, is pressuring Ukraine to lower their draft age to 18. Previously, they had only recruited older men. The average age of the Ukrainian military right now is 43. But and they've resisted recruiting young people like 18 to, I think, 26. But the U.S. is saying they need to draft all of their young men and send them into the front, because the front lines are starting to wobble for the Ukrainians as they run out of manpower, out of trained soldiers, as they get ground down by the artillery and the drones. And Russia's military is advancing in technology, is advancing in tactics faster than the Ukrainians are getting those same developments, because the Ukrainians are depending upon foreign aid in military equipment. So whatever they get is what they get. They don't have the resources on their own to actually fight this war, whereas the Russians are on their own, and in order to proceed with their aggressive invasion, they need to develop their own weapons. So the Ukrainians are being ground down.
who is a brutal dictator? And are you going to give President-elect Trump the military advice that you have given others to achieve the objective of us winning the war in Ukraine? How do you think a rapid end to the war that Vladimir Putin started will affect the United States standing across the world?
Senator, I will always give clear guidance, best guidance to the President of the United States on matters like that.
Do you think that if we concede to Vladimir Putin that will hurt our credibility with our allies and partners? And do you not believe that our adversaries are watching?
Perhaps you can take that for the record, Mr. Hegseth. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to submit for the record a letter submitted by Mr. Christopher Ahn, the former Director of Operations for Vets for Freedom. Mr. Ahn, his letter states that the suggestion, quote, the suggestion that funds were misused for personal gain, lavish parties, or other improper purposes is categorically false. Throughout my time working with Pete Hegseth, he consistently demonstrated exceptional integrity and leadership. I asked unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hegseth, good to see you here today. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Senator.
And your willingness to serve. I also want to thank you for your clarity in articulating the vision you have for the Department of Defense in restoring an ethos, a warrior ethos, which is in stark contrast to the ethos we've seen the last 4 years, which is of weakness and wokeness. And I want to drill down on a few things specifically and exactly how we've gotten to where we've gotten with recruiting and morale. DEI. There's been a little bit of discussion about this, but for those watching at home, DEI is not about giving everybody opportunity. It is rooted in cultural Marxism. The idea that you pit the room, any room, with oppressor versus oppressed. It's race essentialism, and it is poison. It has no business whatsoever in our military. I think the American people have spoken loudly and clearly about this. They're tired of this. They're tired of woke ideology. And to my Democrat colleagues on the other side, if you haven't picked up on that, you missed the plot, because that's what November 5th partially was about. And so let's talk specifically about some of these DEI programs that have been funded. In our academies, specifically the Air Force Academy, it was advised as disfavored language to refer to your mom and dad as mom and dad, okay? Dear mom and dad, I'm writing home. Don't say that. That's insane. We're all just people. You can't say that either. And in an effort to police this, in a 1984 Orwellian novel, there was actually an eyes and ears program to rat on your fellow students who might say mom and dad. Or just.
By the way, they have at the Academy, Air Force Academy, an eyes and ears program. They have an oath, which is that they will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate anyone who does. So if you're in the U.S. Air Force Academy and somebody lies, and you know that they lied, they will try to kick you out if you don't turn them in for lying. It's actually, so this is already the way the U.S. Air Force works.
Say in a tough situation, you know what? We're all just people. Can't say that. This wasn't limited, by the way, to our academies. The Secretary of the Air Force, our current Secretary of the Air Force, in a memo from August of 2022, thought we had too many white officers, advocated for quotas. And if you crunch the numbers,
okay, if somebody said we need more non-white officers, so what? It's a memo. Who gives a shit?
That 5,800 white officers who've worked really hard should be fired in the United States of America. I don't know how we got here. And by the way, the Air Force isn't alone here. The Navy sort of touted a drag queen influencer. This stuff is insane. And people wonder why recruiting has dropped off. And let me just go through a few numbers, and I want to get your comments on how we fix this, because it's gone completely off the rails. In 2022, the Army missed their recruiting goal of 60,000 soldiers by over 15,000. In 2023, the Navy missed their recruiting goals by over 7,000. In 2022, the Air Force couldn't meet their standards, their numbers, even though they lowered their standards. They've lowered their standards to meet numbers they still can't get to. Mr. Hegseth, we got to fix this. I think what you've demonstrated today is that you have the talent and the ability and the desire to fix it. How are you going to fix it?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. First and foremost, up front, you have to tear out DEI and CRT initiatives, root and branch out of institutions.
100%.
And then you have to put in Army, Navy, and Air Force secretaries and others, civilian positions at the helm, who are committed to the same priorities that the President of the United States is, and if confirmed, the Secretary of Defense will be. Send a clear message that this is not a time for equity. Equity is a very different word than equality. Equality is the bedrock of our military. Men and women, duty positions in uniform, black, white, doesn't matter. We treat you equally based on who you are in the image of God as an individual. And we all get the same bad haircuts. You're not an individual, you're part of a group. Equity prescribes some sort of an outcome based on differing attributes that we have that divide us. What skin color are you? What gender are you? and then infuse that into institutions which manifest in things like quotas.
That sounds like wokeism, because if somebody is a white racist and they say something racist, that divides us on race. So you want to go and you want to punish that person, correct? Or is that being woke? I can't keep track.
Formal or informal, which does what to morale? Sends it in the tubes. And it makes people feel like they're being judged by something other than how good they are at their job, which is poisonous inside institutions.
So on top of this recruiting crisis, that wasn't enough for this administration. During the COVID hysteria and in their attempt to fire 100,000 people who worked for bigger companies because they didn't get the COVID shot, or to mask 5-year-olds, they decided also to make this a central plank in their policy at the Pentagon. 8,000 well-trained, so we got a recruiting crisis, 8,000 well-trained men and women were fired. Will you commit today, Mr. Hegseth, recruit these folks back, to give them back pay and give them an apology from the United States government for how they were disrespected?
Senator, I will commit to this because the Commander-in-Chief has committed to this. That not only will they be reinstated, they will receive an apology, back pay, and rank that they lost because they were forced out due to an experimental vaccine.
Thank you, and I'm a limited time, but I just want to say...
Wait, back pay? You're going to give conservatives like $300,000 for refusing to follow vaccine orders? Reparations for anti-vaxxers?
The talk of experience and not coming from the same cocktail parties that permanent Washington is used to, you are a breath of fresh air. And again, if you weren't paying attention to what this election was all about, it was about the disruptors versus the establishment. And the American people have had enough of business as usual for the same people that we line up for.
Okay, guys, like, I might have to take a break from politics, because if I'm going to start advocating for things that I can't advocate for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on your chairmanship. I want to make a request to the committee that we have a second round of questions.
Pursuant to the bipartisan staff agreement that we reached late last year, this will be one round of 7-minute questions.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll be happy to recognize my colleague, Mr. Reed.
I think it's important to note for the record that when Secretary Hagel was here, we had 3 rounds of questioning. When Secretary Carter was here, we had 2 rounds of questioning. And I cannot recall any time where I have denied, as the chairman, a member to ask for a second round and receive the second round. So we are, I think, violating the principles of the committee, and I just want to go on the record.
Your comment is noted.
Thank you.
Your comment is noted.
Mr. Hegseth,
thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your service to this country.
Thank you, Senator.
Few nominees come into this room with all the necessary experience to do this job, to be Secretary of Defense. We get that. It's a reflection on just how big of a job this is. What I want to understand is whether or not you bring any of the necessary experience that this job requires. And here's where I'm concerned. Senator Coleman, in introducing you, and this is a quote, he said, "He has struggled and overcome great personal challenges," unquote. You walk in here saying that you've had personal and character issues in your past, including heavy drinking, which you wrote about. And you said, and this is a quote from you, that you said, "I sit before you as an open book." Yet you haven't actually said what personal challenges it is that you've overcome when you've been asked about them. So I'm going to give you an opportunity here to be as forthright as you say you want to be. So while leading concerned veterans of America, there were very specific cases cited by individuals about your conduct. I'm going to go through a few of them, and I just want you to tell me if these are true or false. On Memorial Day 2014, at a CVA event in Virginia, you needed to be carried out of the event for being intoxicated.
Senator, anonymous smears.
Just true or false? Very simple. Summer of 2014 in Cleveland, drunk in public with the CVA team.
Anonymous smears.
I'm just asking for true or false questions, true or false answers. An event in North Carolina, drunk in front of 3 young female staff members after you had instituted a no alcohol policy and then reversed it. True or false?
Anonymous smears.
December of 2014 at the CVA Christmas party at the Grand Hyatt at Washington, D.C.
I will not answer.
You were noticeably intoxicated and had to be carried up to your room. Is that true or false?
Anonymous smears.
Another time, a CVA staffer stated that you passed out in the back of a party bus. Is that true or false?
Anonymous smears.
In 2014, while in Louisiana on official business for CVA, did you take your staff, including young female staff members, to a strip club?
Absolutely not. Anonymous smears.
So is it accurate that the organization reached a financial settlement with a female staffer who claimed to be at a strip club with you, and there was a colleague who attempted to sexually assault her. Was there a financial settlement?
Senator, I was not involved in that. I don't know the nature of how that played out.
But you understand there was a financial settlement for a young female staffer accused another member of the organization, not you, sexual assault in a strip club.
We have multiple statements on the record referring to that.
But you claim you were not there when that occurred.
Absolutely not.
Now, the behavior I cited, if true, do you think that this behavior of intoxication, going into these type of establishments, women on your staff being so uncomfortable that they have to file these sort of harassment claims, do you think this is appropriate behavior for a leader?
Senator, the overwhelming majority of anyone who's worked for me, including the on-the-record statements that have been submitted to this, with their name on it, on the record, men and women who worked with me every day, are the overwhelming preponderance of evidence that testify to my leadership and professionalism in leading Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America.
Okay.
My leadership has been completely impugned on these veterans organizations that did fantastic work.
Mr. Hegseth, I'm not even going to go into the
accusations. And we managed our financial books with integrity across the board. How many people, everybody who runs the campaign.
I have limited time. I'm not going to get into the accusations that come from Fox News. I know you have some of your Fox News colleagues here. There were multiple instances of accusations against you about drinking on the job.
All anonymous, all false, all refuted by my colleagues who I worked with for 10 years at 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and everything.
The challenge here for me, Mr. Hegseth, is when there is discussion about personal challenges and you admittedly had issues with heavy drinking, it's hard to kind of square the circle here. It's kind of a difficult thing to do. Let me ask you, if I have about 90 seconds left here, if you had to answer these questions about sexual assault against you and your drinking and your personal conduct, would it have been different if you were under oath?
Senator, all I'm pointing out is the false claims against me.
Okay, I take it you do not want to answer that question. I walked into this hearing this morning concerned that you haven't demonstrated adequate leadership in your civilian roles, and this is a dangerous world we're living in here. And America cannot afford a Secretary of Defense who is unprepared for that mission. I'm going to leave with concerns about your transparency. You say you've had personal issues in your past, yet when asked about those very issues, you blame an anonymous smear campaign, even when many of these claims are not anonymous. Which is it? Have you overcome personal issues, or are you the target of a smear campaign? It can't be both. It's clear to me that you're not being honest with us or the American people, because you know the truth would disqualify you from getting the job. And just as concerning as each of these specific disqualifying accusations are, what concerns me just as much is the idea of having a Secretary of Defense who is not transparent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my 2 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. I would, at this point, ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record letters by Tina Kingston, Louisiana State Director of Concerned Veterans for America, and Holly Talley, Louisiana Local Director of Concerned Veterans for America, attesting to the appropriateness of Mr. Hegseth's conduct with regard to female staffers. Without objection, that is added to the record. And Senator Banks, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Hegseth. You have conducted yourself very well today. In fact, so well that I believe it's incumbent upon this committee to confirm you ASAP to get you on the job to clean up the mess that we have at the Pentagon ongoing at this moment because of the leadership there over the last 4 years that's failed us. In President Biden's first year in office, the Department of Defense spent over 5 million man-hours on quote-unquote counter-extremism and diversity training, what you and I might...
Okay, if you want to say how little 5 million man-hours is, I've gotten, I think I'm at like 16 million hours watched on my stream, right? Like total. So like 5 million hours across the Department of Defense is like absolutely nothing. We're talking about millions upon millions of people. That's like nothing.
Training or DEI. The administration has refused to provide us any more recent data than that first year, but we know
sure
there's
Hassan gets like 15 hours a month.
Wasted on
15
DEI
million
over the
hours a
last
month.
4 years. And I wonder,
or
what do you
more.
make of that? What could those 5 million man-hours in that first year of Secretary Austin and President Biden's administration, what could those 5 million man-hours have been used for?
Senator, that's a lot of service members sitting in a lot of briefs, hearing about a lot of threats or political perspectives that might be dangerous, that do not comport to threats that actually exist inside the force, or ideas that introduce critical race theory or DEI or climate change initiatives that they and their commands have to conform to. And every time one of those happens, it gets pushed down the chain of command. That also includes new layers of leadership that have been created under this administration committed to enforcing those types of DEI and CRT initiatives. So we hear 5 million man hours, and that sounds like a lot. The more troubling aspect is how many training hours that takes away from a company commander or battalion commander or wing commander who's out there trying to maintain their force, which is already constrained because of what the Biden administration has done to the defense budget and defense capabilities. So they're having to choose between the political prerogatives of the civilians who are demanding more DEI and CRT and gender quotas and the readiness of their forces. And I believe this Pentagon is prepared because of our commander-in-chief for a Secretary of Defense, should I be confirmed, that laser focuses on these issues, and they're ready to respond. They want to pack their rucksacks and go train because they understand we live in a dangerous world.
I think that's an important point, a key point, because months later, while the priority of the Biden-Austin-led Pentagon was on DEI and woke training, one of the biggest embarrassments in American history happened when we lost 13 of our heroes in the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. Secretary Austin testified before the House Armed Services Committee a couple of years ago, and responding to a question from me said he had, quote, no regrets about what happened in Afghanistan. I wonder, what do you make of that?
Also, I legitimately believe, and this is my personal conspiracy theory, that the CIA was behind the attack. It was an ISIS attack in Kabul that attacked Taliban and American troops. I believe that was an American CIA dark op to punish basically Joe Biden for withdrawing. It was a way to put a pie in his face. It was a CIA agent going rogue, or, you know, because that's how the CIA actually works. It's not really very central. I don't think people really understand how intelligence really works in America. Like, the CIA isn't like a centralized people giving orders. People get broad mission sets, and they're allowed to operate in this mission set and largely get to do it without accountability. So I think it was an American CIA agent fundamentally at the end that did that. That's my conspiracy theory. I don't have any evidence for it, but it just smells right to me. And in 50 or 100 years, if we could ever declassify what was going on in the war on terror, if they haven't already burned all the documents, that one is sitting there somewhere in some file.
Senator, it's shameful. They still tout it as the most successful airlift in American history, when what the rest of us all saw was true laid before our eyes. Utter failure, a destruction of a military legacy there, abandonment of our allies, death of American troops, detriment to our reputation, and then no answers and no accountability on the other side. And then what was unleashed because of what happened in Afghanistan? The October 7th attacks, an invasion into Ukraine. The world recognized weakness for what it was. And who bore the brunt for it? The troops on the front lines at Abbey Gate doing an impossible job, whose external security was the Taliban, because there was no actual plan for this under the Biden administration. And yet, not a single person, the only person held accountable in those moments was a Marine Corps lieutenant colonel who had the courage to stand up and say someone should be held accountable for that. His name is Stu Scheller. No one else involved has ever taken accountability for it. And when that microcosm becomes the reality of the perception of the American military or America's commitment to victory and success and positive outcomes, the world responds to that. President Trump is going to restore real deterrence by bringing a real warrior culture back, rebuilding our military, and ending wars properly. And if we have to fight them, winning them decisively.
I served in Afghanistan, you served in Afghanistan. 75% of our nation's veterans disagree with how the withdrawal from Afghanistan was handled, the embarrassment of it. What that's done, I believe, has directly impacted our historic recruitment crisis in this country, without a doubt. And you've already talked about that, but how do we fix it? How do we bring pride back to wearing the uniform for the next generation, to inspire them to do what you and I did, to raise our right hand and take that oath and serve this great country?
I really do think it comes back to strong, clear leadership, patriotic, pro-American leadership.
So in other words, just a guy that they could worship.
All the other political prerogatives. That's why.
That's what's going to make people love America again. Having a figurehead to worship.
Uniform, none of that matters. You wear green, you wear blue, you bleed red. That's it. Who you vote for doesn't matter. But when the perception of that changes, then you don't want people deciding whether to serve based on a political party in power. That's a dangerous thing for continuity.
You just said
inside
that's what it needed.
And it's fragile right now. President Trump, and if I'm confirmed with my leadership, we're going to restore the continuity of an apolitical military that acts decisively and only based on merit. They sound basic, but they're fundamental.
You and I agree that wokeness is weakness. Mr. Hegseth, do you support racial quotas in recruitment or promotions?
We're going to have an apolitical military. Meanwhile, wokeness is weakness.
Military?
Senator, I do not support any form of racial quota.
Do you support affirmative action in our nation's military academies?
Senator, I only support hiring and promoting and admitting the best and brightest, whatever their background is.
I think that's very important. Mr. Hegseth, Lloyd Austin, the secretary, later went AWOL. He disappeared for days and never told the president, didn't even inform the president's chief of staff that he was going into the hospital. Would that ever occur on your watch?
No, Senator. I know in any one of my jobs, if I had decided to go AWOL for even a day or two in uniform or around that, that would have been a concern.
I believe accountability matters. No one to this day has ever, as you've said, been held accountable for what happened in Afghanistan. It was embarrassing to this country. It's impacted this country greatly. And I applaud you and President Trump for bringing accountability back to our Pentagon. With that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the distinguished ranking member for a unanimous consent request.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit an article discussing some of the issues of readiness and DEI. There has been a comment that 5.9 million man-hours have been used for DEI. General Milley clarified that that's an estimate out of more than 2 billion man-hours that the Department of Defense invested during the time period.
Where's this published, sir?
This is published by Megan Myers, and I will get the
okay. Then
military.com. I'm sorry.
without objection, it will be admitted to the record. And Senator Slotkin, welcome to the committee.
Thank
and you
you.
are recognized.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for referencing the great Carl Levin as you introduced me. We miss him in Michigan. For those who I haven't met in my 1 week that I've been sworn into the Senate, I'm a CIA officer recruited after 9/11. I did 3 tours armed in Iraq alongside the military, and have worked for 4 different secretaries of defense, both Democrat and Republican, proudly, and watched them make decisions that literally determine the life and death of Americans.
Slotkin, thank you, Michigan.
I'm also a Democrat representing a state that Trump won, right? We both won on the same ballot. So I understand that President Trump has the right to nominate his people. We are going to have policies that we disagree with. All of that, to me, comes very standard. What I think I'm most concerned with is that no president has the right to use the uniformed military in a way that violates the U.S. Constitution and further taints the military as that apolitical institution that we all want, right? And our founders designed the system so that we had posse comitatus, that we weren't going to use active duty military inside the United States and make American citizens potentially scared of their own military. We went through our own experience with that with the British. As the Secretary of Defense, you will be the one man standing in the breach should President Trump give an illegal order, right? I'm not saying he will, but if he does, you are going to be the guy that he calls to implement this order. Do you agree that there are some orders that can be given by the Commander-in-Chief that would violate the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, thank you for your service. But I reject the premise that President Trump is going to be giving illegal orders.
No, I'm not saying he will, but do you believe there is such a thing as an illegal order that Joe Biden or any other president, Donald Trump, could give? Is there anything that a commander-in-chief could ask you to do with the uniformed military that would be in violation of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, anybody of any party
Right.
could give an order that is against the Constitution or against the law.
Right. Okay. So are you saying that you would stand in the breach and push back if you were given an illegal order?
I start by saying I reject the premise that President
I
Trump will be
understand.
giving
You've done your
any
genuflecting
illegal
to him,
orders
but
at all.
This isn't a hypothetical, okay? Your predecessor in a Trump administration, Secretary Esper, was asked and did use uniformed military to clear unarmed protesters. He was given the order to potentially shoot at them. Helos flew low in Washington, D.C. as crowd control. He later apologized publicly for those actions. Was he right or wrong to apologize?
Senator, I was there on the ground. I saw that.
I understand, and I respect that.
I've been there.
But you're about to be the Secretary of Defense.
That was involved in that moment. I
Was
also
he right
understand
to? So he was
legality and the Constitution.
Sir, was he
and
right
the
or
laws of what
wrong
you
to
have.
apologize?
I'm not going to put words in the mouth of Secretary Esper or
No,
anybody else. from
he
this
said them
podium.
himself. You don't have to. What are you scared of? Did he do the right thing by apologizing?
I'm not scared of anything, Senator.
Then say
I'm
yes or no.
interested
You
in
can say
upholding
no.
the laws and the Constitution
Okay,
in any
so
particular
Donald
scenario.
Trump asked for the active duty 82nd Airborne to be deployed during that same time. Secretary Esper has written that he convinced him against that decision. If Donald Trump asked you to use the 82nd Airborne in law enforcement roles in Washington, D.C., would you also convince him otherwise?
I'm not going to get ahead of conversations I would have with the president. However, there are laws and processes inside our Constitution that would be followed.
President Trump said in November that he is willing to consider using the active duty military against the, quote, enemy within. Have you been personally involved in discussions of using the U.S. military active duty inside the United States?
Senator, I'm glad we finally got to the topic of border security equaling national security because it's been abdicated and ignored for the last 4 years.
That wasn't my question. I'm just asking, have you been involved? You're about to be the Secretary of Defense potentially. Have you been involved in discussions about using the active duty military inside the United States?
Senator, I am not yet the Secretary of Defense.
Right. I'm
If
just asking-
confirmed, I would be party to any number of
So you
conversations.
haven't been in any of these
which I would not
conversations?
reveal what I have discussed with the President of the
No,
United States.
just
or
have
not.
you been in conversations? Again, you're going to be in charge of 3 million people, the active duty that I know you care about. I believe you care about. So have you been in conversations about using the active duty in any way? Whether it's setting up in detention camps, policing dangerous cities, have you been involved in any of those conversations?
Certainly, I have been involved in conversations relating to doing things this administration has not, which is secure the southern border and not allow floods of illegal
So
into
are
our
you-
country
so-
through an invasion
Okay.
that threatens the American people.
Okay,
And
okay,
there
I
are
got
ways
it.
in which the military is already playing a role in that, to include 5,000 National
Do you
Guardsmen from
believe
Indiana and
that the
Texas
US
who are at the border right now, allowing for border
Will
security.
you
So there is
ask the
plenty of
active
precedent
duty
for
military to
members
staff
enforcing
detention
our southern
centers?
border.
Our U.S. military is not trained in law enforcement roles. I think you know that, right? We've seen how that mission is difficult for them in places like Iraq and Afghanistan because that's not the training a uniformed military comes with. Do you support the use of active duty military in supporting detention camps?
Senator, everything we will do would be lawful and under the Constitution,
Okay,
but
I'm
I
gonna take that as a
recognize
yes.
that this administration has abdicated its responsibility. President Trump is going to
Okay,
restore
in the
order at the
spirit
border,
of preserving
prevent our
the
enemies from
institution,
invading, and yes, he has said
Sir,
mass
I get your
deportations
filibustering.
will
I
be
get it. I
a
get
part
it.
of what
In the
happens.
spirit of preserving the institution that I think we both care about, legitimately, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I've heard a couple of different things. One,
Now she just said he cares about the institution. Why?
justice system in the military. Yes or no? You said that earlier.
Those are
I'm just
laws,
confirming.
Senator, set by Congress.
Okay, so you will not go to change it. You will not attempt to change it. You also said that JAG officers are potentially people who put their own interests in their own medals and promotions ahead of the troops. Senator Lindsey Graham was a JAG officer for most of his life. Is that what you believe about those who implement our justice system in the U.S.
These
military?
centrist
Senator,
Democrats
I
are
was
fucking
speaking about
losers.
particular JAG officers I've had to deal with in my military
Are you going to
experience,
get
not about a
involved?
member of the United States
Are
Senate.
you, as Secretary of Defense, going to get involved in the implementation of the U.S. Military Code of Justice?
Senator, ultimately, it will be a big part of my job to evaluate decisions vis-a-vis
Okay,
the
so I'll take
Uniform
that.
Code of
I'll
Military
take that as
Justice.
yes. Have you seen the,
fairly.
is CQ Brown on your list in the Warrior Boards to be removed from his position?
Senator, every single senior officer will be reviewed based on meritocracy, standards, lethality, and commitment to lawful orders they will be given.
Thank you, Senator Slotkin. I now recognize Senator Shaheen for a unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a request from a former general who served 35 years, Dennis Leitch, who most recently was commander of the 94th Regional Readiness Command at Fort Devens, Mass., who has asked that his letter opposing Mr. Hegseth's nomination be entered into the record.
Is there objection? Without objection, it will be entered. Also, I present a host of letters and op-eds from former co-workers at Vets for Freedom and Concerned Vets for America, as well as Fox News Channel. I also have letters and op-eds from many veterans and Iraqis and Afghanis who were helped by Mr. Hegseth. I ask unanimous consent to introduce these letters and op-eds. Without objection, is so ordered. Senator Sheehy, you've been very patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Entering a support letter in for Mr. Hegseth, submitted by nearly 90 former soldiers who served with Pete in combat. I would like to submit a statement from 86 of them who support his nomination, although they come from different units and ranks. The signatories commend Mr. Hegseth for his selfless leadership, love of his soldiers, and commitment to our country.
2 items.
Sorry, 1 item. I ask unanimous consent to enter this.
Without objection, it will be entered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete, I'm actually going to ask you questions because I want to hear your answer. How many genders are there?
Senator, there are 2 genders.
I know that well. I'm a Sheehy, so I'm on board. What is the diameter of the rifle round fired out of an M4A1 rifle?
That's a 5.56.
How many push-ups can you do?
I did 5 sets of 47 this morning. My
What do you think
brother saw it.
what do you think are most important strategic bases in the Pacific?
In the Pacific, Guam is pretty strategically significant.
How many rounds of 5.56 can you fit into the magazine of an M4 rifle?
Depends on the magazine, but standard issue is 30.
That's actually wrong. It's
And what
20.
size round is the
banana clips are 30, but it's okay.
9 Beretta standard issue sidearm for the military fire.
A 9mm.
What kind of batteries do you put in your night vision goggle?
By the way, chat, like this is the interview that Republicans want to put out, and he's about to fail it. He's about to get one wrong because this is softball shit for babies.
Duracell.
So right there, you're representing qualifications that show you understand what the warfighter deals with every single day on the battlefield. You understand what happens on the front line, where our troops will be. And what happens, unfortunately, in this country is decisions made in rooms like this, bad decisions, end up in dead 17, 18, 19-year-old Americans. And those Americans rarely come from families that sit in rooms like this. They come from lower, middle-income families who sometimes the military is on the way out.
and they join because maybe they want to go to college, maybe they have no other choice, maybe they love this country, but for whatever reason they joined and they saw it on the dotted line. And when people like us screw up, they don't come home. And that's the one thing that I care about. As you remember when I shut the door, when you came with your entourage, Senator Coleman, I've known for a long time, and you and I sat together, asked you one question. You remember what that question was?
Are you going to have the backs of the war fighters?
Exactly. What is going to be your number one priority? And I don't care, frankly, what all these letters and articles say. I've been part of a smear campaign too, I get it. I care that you're going to have one thing in mind when you sit in that chair in that 5-sided building, and you told me what that was. So with that, you have my support. I'm sorry you have to go through a process like this, but it is one of the most important jobs in the world. We got to make sure you're ready for it. I thank you for your answers. I got one final question that's very important to me. This is more of a technical question, but I think it's to fix the Army in this country is a 1 or 2 year problem. We can make bullets, we can make rifles. Fix the Air Force might be a 5-year problem. To fix our Navy is a decades-long pursuit. How are you going to fix our national? You don't have all the power. We're not China, unfortunately, can't snap your fingers. But how are you going to lead an initiative within the DoD to reinvigorate our national shipbuilding industry so we are able to compete with China? Because freedom of navigation is critical to our economy and the global economy. It's going to be a very important task for you to complete.
It's a critical question, Senator, and that's why I'm grateful that President Trump has said definitively to me and publicly that shipbuilding will be one of his absolute top priorities of this administration. So a lot of it does go into pulling things up into the OSD's office, Secretary of Defense's office, to shine a spotlight on it, to make sure the bureaucracy doesn't strangle important initiatives that need to happen. We need to reinvigorate our defense industrial base in this country to include our shipbuilding capacity. Some of it is on the east, some of it's on the west, some of it's on the Great Lakes. The workforce problems that our shipyards are facing are significant, and there's been a big investment from this committee, I know, in a lot of those places because of the shortfalls, manpower issues, everything else. But we also see adversaries that have been able to innovate themselves in ways that their shipbuilding capacity is, I won't reveal it at this hearing, multitudes and multitudes beyond our capabilities. So it needs to be a rapid investment, a rapid fielding, and then we need to incentivize outside entities to fill the gap. We talk a lot about UAVs. UAVs are very important, but there's also a future of UUVs, unmanned underwater vehicles, that will be a part of amplifying the impact of our Navy, because this administration has allowed our number of ships to drop below 300. It sets a projection of 340 or 350, but doesn't create the capacity to actually address it. And so if we're going to defend our interests, our allies, and put America first, we're going to have to be able to project power. That means shipbuilding. It means historic investments in our defense industrial base there. And then also driving innovation and cost savings in ways that only business leaders inside the Pentagon can do.
When I'd add, I don't think any board in the world would have hired Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg when they founded their companies either. So this country was founded by young people who had a great vision. Thank you for being willing to serve your country again. And thanks for coming here today. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sheehy. You yield back the balance of your time.
All right, that's it, chat.
Mr. Ranking Member, can we agree that you and I will notify members of a specific time until which the record will remain open for submission of questions for the record?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
That will be a day or two. This concludes today's hearing. I want to thank the witnesses and their families, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Anyone not putting their name on it is shady, because they probably have. First of all, are you fucking stupid? Like, legitimately, your question is dumb. Pete Hegseth is got the support of the MAGA mob. If you put your name out there accusing him of anything, you're gonna have a million misogynists making death threats, doxing you, looking into your background. Like, are you stupid? Like, do you not understand how the world works? Like, what are you doing with your question? Second of all, people probably have NDAs, and they'll be opening themselves up to litigation if they were to make comments openly while bound by the NDA and without being released. And the reality is, Republicans don't care about anything anymore. They're like America, and I want you to understand something, chat. America's broken. Like, it's broken. All the stuff, you know, that us socialists used to criticize as the velvet glove and concealing the corruption. Well, now it's to the point where they've swept so much filth under the rug that the rug is mounded. You could see the mound. And so they just stripped it off. We've got a pile of shit in the middle of the living room, and nobody fucking cares. They're like, we like the smell of shit. America is basically the cat hoarder house. And instead of people going like, wow, this is really bad, we need to gut this whole thing, they're like, they like the smell of cat piss. Nothing matters anymore.
There's a ton out there.
All right, chat. That was Pete Hegseth's confirmation hearing, at least most of it. And my feeling is that he's going to get every Republican. I didn't see. I mean, they were asking him softball questions like, what is the round in a rifle? What? The questions were asked to be so stupid that the average hog could be able to answer them, right? Like, holy shit. All right, chat. It is one day left before the world's largest human migration, China's Spring Festival travel rush. An estimated 510 million passenger trips will be handled by rail during this time. That number is totally insane. It's 1.5 times the entire population of the United States. And they're going to be doing it on electric high-speed rail. Aesthetic of red and gold is so much better than the aesthetic of white and blue. How cool this is, man. All right, chat. Hassan Abi got a national NBC News interview because he went and spoke to incarcerated firefighters. And this is the type of shit that I'm talking about, man. Like, this is incredible. You know, there's a lot of really negative shit happening, but at the same time, our politics, and this is why sometimes people say, Mike, why do you like Hassan? Why do you orbit Hassan? Or why do you support Hassan so much? And the answer is because I legitimately am a Hassan watcher. I watched Hassan before I streamed, and I watch Hassan now. And I'm talking about hundreds of hours a year. Maybe even, I might have even crossed over 1,000 last year. I watch a shit ton of Hassan. He's always open on my other monitors when I'm at the computer. I am watching a shit ton of Hassan. I agree with Hassan. I like his takes, and I'm a supporter of the community. It's just straight the reality. I have, are you at 1 million chat points? Probably. I think I have 900,000 or something. And like, and I do that for one reason and one reason only. Because I like Hassan's politics. And as you've seen me criticize Majority Report, just because I'm friendly with some group, just because they supported me in the past, doesn't mean I'm not going to criticize them when I think they're going off the rails. I support Hassan because I agree with his policies and politics for the most part. And when I'm to his left, I call him out. And the thing is, Hassan always respects people that are making good faith criticisms of his positions on policies. Do you know how rare that is? To have a good person who's not mired in a bunch of scandals, who's not trying to take advantage of his audience, who listens to the left and is trying to do something and build up the left. And I think a lot of people see that, which is why he's so popular. And so to see him growing, I recognize that that's good for me, and it's good for all of us who want to see a better world. And if somebody hates Hassan, that is my most reliable indicator that they are a fucking freak. And when I criticize him, he respects it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is rare. A major creator who also listens to criticism and disagreement without being a freak. So that's why I support Hassan. That's why I'll continue to support Hassan. Did you see that Kim Kardashian shared one of the clips in her story? Oh, shit. I have a couple leftist friends who say he's too abrasive. Oh, shit. If they think Hassan is too abrasive,
water because that's the safest option. And they believe there are people who maybe did that and then didn't make it out. That death toll is expected to rise in the coming days. The question is how high, and the hope is that it won't be too much higher, but there are still at least 24 people unaccounted for and considered missing by fire and police officials here.
Yeah, so grim. Ellis and Barbara, praying for a miracle. Thank you so much for your reporting. Meanwhile, as we talk about all these multi-million-dollar homes, there are some very important people on the fire lines who are finally getting to share their voice as well, in part thanks to a pretty big Twitch streamer, Hassan Piker. You might have already seen shots of inmates out there on the fire lines. Right now, there are like 900 to 1,000 of them. It's a program that's been around for a while here in California, but what is catching people's attention, well, part of it is is the pay. It's like $10 a day. They can earn a little bit more when actively fighting fires, an additional $1 an hour during emergencies. And working in that program can also get them some time off their sentence, and for some, record expungement. But joining us now is Twitch streamer and YouTuber Hassan Piker. He lives out here in LA. He headed out to where they've been staging to help shed some light on what they do. That help the rest of us out here. Hassan, thanks so much for being with you. But before we get into this, I do want to play a clip of this interview for viewers. It was a fascinating interview. I think you talked to a man by the name of Williams. Let's take a quick look.
Right now they're on break, right? They're doing 24 hours off. But when you're back out there, you sleep out there. Yeah, absolutely. Right? So they give you like what? Like they give you gear and then they give you like sleeping gear?
Pretty much what you got right here. And then you got your Nomex on, your Nomex shirt on.
That's it?
Yeah, that's all.
They don't give you any sleeping gear?
No, not on the mountain.
And Hassan, we've been with inmate crews. I've never seen them give such insight as they did with you. If you get a chance, anybody that's watching, they should check out your whole clip. What was your impression of what it's like for them and the work that they're doing right now?
I had an incredible opportunity to be able to talk to these guys directly, uninterrupted, in a very real setting when they were on their 24-hour break. Because of the wonderful work that Scott Budnick, he's a Hollywood producer, and he started the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, is doing specifically with the incarcerated firefighters. And in that process, I found their experience to be very dignified from their own assessment. The fact that they were able to contribute back to their communities was something that they truly appreciated in terms of the opportunity, although the conditions are still obviously very grim. And one of the major things that they brought up was, of course, the wages, as you guys also pointed out to. Right now, I believe it's around $24 a day when they're actively fighting wildfires. And I think that is one area that desperately needs improvement. Another thing that I was also shocked by was the fact that in order to be able to volunteer for this program, you actually leave prison and go to a conservation camp to get training, and then you remain there when you're not actively out in the field fighting fires. And one thing that they mentioned were the comparably much more humane conditions at conservation camps. Some of the inmates reported that they had access to weight training facilities and like actual real weights. Apparently in California prisons, you don't have access to real weights any longer. And little things like that, I think, go a very long way in making inmates feel human again, and making inmates feel like real people rather than cogs in a machine. And I think that is tremendously helpful in rehabilitation and the rehabilitative process, and also helping them reintegrate back into society after they're done serving their time.
Yeah, one of the most fascinating parts of the interview, I thought, was when you started to ask them about what this was like compared to what it's like in lockup. If we have some of that, can we play a little quick clip there?
Is it better than being in prison or no? It's way better, because I was in a prison yard. I'm seeing guys get stabbed, get jumped, get beat up. The cops treat us like. But here, we get better treatment, right? They talk to us like humans. They talk to us like humans. We got a job. We're underpaid, but we got a job. Yeah. Feel me? And then the community comes out and shows us all kinds of love. We never received that growing up. We never received that kind of love, that kind of recognition in anything we've done. So now, doing this kind of stuff and all this love coming, that's life-changing.
Yeah, we never received that growing up. I mean, like, again, this interview is absolutely fascinating. Do you think it's working?
I think the incarcerated firefighter program is pretty successful in terms of finding a lot of the people that are slated for rehabilitation, and it seemingly has been very successful as far as what they have reported. Another thing that I Another thing that they kept repeating over and over again was the fact that inside of the camp structure, there's a lot more unity. There's no racial tension or animosity of the sort. There's no violence because they desperately do not want to go back to the regular prison structure, as Kimbo also pointed out right there, because there's a lot of violence in regular prison. And I think that it is not only an example of the success of the program itself, but I think it's also a criticism of the current carceral state in a state like California, where the prison structure needs desperate reform so that the entirety of the California prison system could look closer to the camp conditions that exist right now that help, I think, tremendously in the rehabilitative process.
Yeah, it's so cool to see the sense of pride and giving back to the community. I mean, we all owe them a huge thanks, and thanks to you for helping shed light on what they're going through. I mean, we've been on the fire lines, and fire lines are hell. So kudos to all those guys that are out there doing the work. Hassan Piker.
I just want to say, like, one of the things that's really important, and I wish we had talked about more, is that these guys shouldn't be paid $25 a day. They should be paid the same as any other firefighter who's out there on the line. And that money should go into an account that is ready for them when they get out of prison, so that instead of being thrown out of prison and then given the minimal amount of money, they have the salary that they earned, that they can go and rent an apartment or put a down payment on a house or go to school and get an education. Right? They should be given an opportunity to get in a fast track to a wildfire firefighting service. And we should just be doing this to guys that are locked up in prison. We should be actively recruiting and building up a firefighting corps. America should have the best firefighters in the world. Because with climate change, this stuff is going to get worse.
Thanks so much for joining us, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. We've got a lot more to get to tonight.
That's so exciting, man.
Have a great night.
All right.
Break.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
I'm going to talk to Sam Brock. He has got the other.
It's super fucking awesome, man. That's super fucking great, dude. I'm really proud of him, man. That, like, it's so awesome to see the way Hassan is kind of crossing into the mainstream. You know, people are talking about us at the highest level, especially Hassan, at the highest levels of politics. People are recognizing the left's power, and they're afraid of it, but they're also acknowledging it. So if you enjoy this type of content, if you want to see us continue to grow and succeed, and if you want to see the left gain power within American politics, we're at a flexing a moment of opportunity. There is no clear leader going forward. And a lot of people are going to try to attach to any Democrat that has national name recognition among politics freaks. And they're going to try to pre-compromise. They're going to say, well, I'm a leftist, but I really like Gretchen Whitmer. In 2025? Shut your fuck. I want you to laugh at people who do that. I want you to laugh at people that do that. I want you to say, stop pre-compromising, you fucking loser. Whoever you support in 2025 is your real politics. Stop playing this game where you're some sort of social democrat or some sort of leftist. If you like Gretchen Whitmer, you're not a leftist, man. You're just supporting a health insurance CEO's failed daughter, okay? Who bought her way into the Michigan State House because of health insurance lobby money. Like, stop it. Just stop it. We need to be finding people that actually are out there with a bold agenda. We need to be finding the people that are going to be pushing left-wing thought. Stop pre-compromising. Stop doing what centrist Democrats do and surrendering before you're even in the conversation. You need to be pushing, you know, I want to start, and I'm thinking of starting, legitimately, I'm thinking of starting a Draft Sean Fain group. I've been pondering it, and I'm wondering if it should be done. Because you know, I am not impressed by any of the names that are being brought on. And a true outsider for the working class. And I don't know that I'm the person that should be leading such a group, but I want to get together and start a draft Sean Fain, because quite frankly, if I hear another person say Andy Bashir or Gretchen Whitmer, I might have a fucking aneurysm. Pete Buttigieg. Oh, we need to support Kamala Harris running for governor of California. What the fuck is wrong with you? That would be a goddamn disaster. That's like saying you want Andrew Cuomo to run for mayor of New York. Are you okay? So if you enjoy having an actual leftist who has an ounce of political acumen doing content like this, then you need to subscribe right now at tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 sub. If you have Amazon Prime, you need to attach that to your Twitch account. You need to use that free Twitch Prime. And remember, chat, there's a lot of people here working paycheck to paycheck, parents of young children, college students, people on a fixed income because of retirement or disability, or just people struggling to make ends meet. Hey, with TikTok going away, I've seen some people talk about Red Note. I just downloaded it right now. And I'm kind of excited. I kind of want to start making content for Red Note. I kind of do. And what I'm really excited about is it seems like international users and Chinese users are in the same pool on Red Note. And I've been looking for a website like that. I think drawing connections between the American people and Chinese people would be the best way to prevent a new Cold War with China. Because Chinese people are just like any other people. Like, it's insane how people treat Chinese people like they're some sort of other. So it's very, 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 very important that we get there. And I saw this post, which is what made me download it. Here, let me show you this, chat. Thank you everybody for supporting this stream. You guys are the best. Hold on. I posted this right before I went live. This is mainland USA according to Common Sense. Texas is gun in hand, God at heart. Alaska is a seasonal depression. Hawaii is resort. Mexico is there's a flying saucer. Colorado is it's a rectangle. Utah is Mormons. Nevada is has been stars. Arizona is Wonder Woman. Idaho is Potato State. California is fake breasts and oranges, and then a bunch of other. Montana is bears infested. North Dakota is barren land. South Dakota is President Mountain. Minnesota is America's Nordic, which is kind of true. Iowa's Eagle. Maine is Big Lobster. New Hampshire is no tax. Vermont is acting French. Louisiana is Atlantis. Georgia is Ray Charles. South Carolina is racist. North Carolina is Cancer Factory. Virginia is Furniture Castle, which is a weird translation. I'm sure there's something going on there. Maryland is Do Statistics. And Pennsylvania is Cracker Empire. Cracker Empire. Michigan is Bankrupt Automaker. Wisconsin is Cheese Country. Illinois is Oprah. Indiana is Highway. Ohio is Bohemian. Kentucky is Fried Chicken. Mississippi is Love to Eat Land, and Alabama is Diabetes. Florida is Free Cubans. All right, there's more in there, but I don't feel like doing it. Xenophobia is my opinion. The reason China has not been putting pressure on America in the West the way the USSR did. The more Americans find out about China, the more these pressures will be exerted, and I welcome it. So true. Did I see this? Tennessee was too hard to read, but if you want to, okay, yeah, here, hold on. I'll post my retweet. Fuck. I'll post my retweet, and you could go and look at your state. Cracker Empire is Pennsylvania. They're just like us. They think we're gonna fight a war against these people, chat.
今天主播给你们刷个大火箭。平时你们都是在抖音上冲园子刷火箭，什么时候见过主播给你们刷的？我这人不一样，就是宠粉，今儿给你们刷个大的。这个就 RPG 火箭筒，从柬埔寨到阿富汗，全世界阵营都在用。我这边呢就是一个正儿八经的高爆弹头，有懂的兄弟们可以讲一下上面的型号。后边呢就是一个柬埔寨军方的一个靶场。话不多说，开刷。Thank you。它底下已经装好了药，上面装了高爆弹头，放进去之后呢卡住，它会有一个旋转台的尾翼，帮它固定住飞行的稳定性。
Two.
给兄弟们刷打火箭。小红书，家人们，
We're cooked. We're cooked. Yusha says, do a 1-minute hello for Redbook, and I'll clip and translate and post it in Discord chat. You could use the app to cut to auto-translate captions. Oh, really? Crack Empire. So true. That camera's like Kai Cenat's chair. So true. A 30-year-old who can't afford a home in the Bay Area, so I live at home and pay with my soul. Well, do your parents own the home? If your parents own their home, you're on boomer death waiting room. And then you're going to go from, depending on how many siblings you have, you're going to go from being broke to being a millionaire overnight. And that's how it's going to be for a lot of us. The problem is we may be too old to have the old grandchildren. You know, the boomers, see, boomers, they got theirs, you know, and the only thing they're mad about is they feel entitled to grandchildren and you're not providing them grandchildren. And that's why they're bitter at you. My boomer parents are spending it all before they die. Oh, definitely. That's certainly a culture that's been created. What else was I going to say? Oh, okay. Yeah, we covered that. What else did I want to cover? Oh God, Biden is a fucking freak. I wanted to show you guys this clip. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, okay. Wait, Trat. I have a, okay, let's start it with talking about this. New Gallup poll on Biden's presidency finds that Americans hold Joe Biden in contempt and find him to be a failure in almost every single important issue area. If you think Biden was a successful president, you are profoundly out of touch and a danger to this nation. Progress reported 18 areas during president's 4 years in office. Now I'm going to mention some issues facing the country and ask you whether you believe the United States has made progress, stood still, or lost ground in each of the last 4 years since Joe Biden became president. According to the American people, lost ground on the federal debt, immigration, gap between the wealthy and the less well-off, taxes, the economy, the United States' position in the world, crime, education, terrorism, trade relations with other countries, national defense of the military, healthcare, race relations, nation's infrastructure, situation for black people, energy, climate change. The one issue that they think on net we've made progress is the situation for gay, lesbian, and transgender people, but only 39% said we made progress. 31% said we stood still, and 23% that we lost ground. Net progress, 16. So they did 18 issue areas, and Joe Biden was considered to be a failure in 17. And they legitimately said, I'm not going to do anything differently from Joe Biden. This is the multi-billion-dollar Kamala Harris campaign. Refuse to make a break from this guy. It's funny because we absolutely lost ground on that. Oh, for sure. I mean, look at some of the shit. Like, this isn't even the Democratic Party. These are like, he can't even get made progress from Democrats. Like 19% on crime, 10% on gap between the wealthy and less off. He's not even getting Democrats. 30% of the people would vote for Adolf Hitler if he had a D next to his name. I mean, these are unbelievably bad numbers. Like, these are catastrophically bad numbers. I have 2 retired parents who are working class who feel compulsive to defend Biden against their Trump racists and friends. Their affiliation to Dems is on policies like food stamps and elder support. How do you advise we move them along on this? The answer is, I think it's already irrelevant. Joe Biden is no longer an important topic for you to talk to your parents about because he's leaving office in 6 days. And once Joe Biden leaves office, it's going to be like he was never even president. I want you to understand that there will never be a president who becomes more irrelevant in the minds of the American people than Joe Biden. He's going to disappear. And the thing is, he's so old and he's so near death that he's not going to have enough time to build up like a reputation post presidency. Like Joe Biden doesn't matter. So what you should be focusing on is, how do I get my parents to support somebody who's actually going to be a good politician in the future, or a good leader in the future? That's what you should be focusing on. Litigating Joe Biden at this point is pointless, except for those of us who are trying to advise and push the Democratic Party in a leftward direction. Gerald Ford versus Biden, for the most irrelevant. It's going to be Joe Biden by far, except for, you know, the consequences of his failures. And I had a video I wanted to show you. Oh, okay. Let's read this article from Vox. I think Joe Biden may be the worst president of my life. And I think there is a strong argument that he may be the worst president of the last 50 years. Now, obviously, you know, Ronald Reagan was incredibly damaging, and George W. Bush were incredibly damaging. Like, these are objectively true statements. But I think Joe Biden is in the running. Now, I would say Ronald Reagan is probably worse. But the thing about Ronald Reagan is, and this is what makes him, why I think Joe Biden is worse than Ronald Reagan, is Ronald Reagan, as damaging and harmful as he was to our country, he accomplished what he set out to do. You know what I mean? So, like, when you look at Ronald Reagan and you say, wow, he was so terrible for America, he was such a terrible president. Well, I mean, he did what he wanted to do. Like, he won for the people and organizations and groups that he was representing, right? He did the things they want him to do. Where with Joe Biden, not only is the country worse off, but except for AIPAC, Joe Biden didn't accomplish any of the things that the people that elected him set him to do. So I would say, just on that point, the tiebreaker goes to Joe Biden is the worst president of my life. And this is Vox Liberals' article on Joe Biden. And I want to read this to you because it's very important that you understand. And I like when Vox has these truth bombs occasionally, because it's very useful to talk to, you know, the liberal family members you have, right? The president who could not choose. Joe Biden's fatal flaw led to 4 years of weakness. To govern is to choose, however difficult the choices may be. If you want to understand where Joe Biden's presidency went wrong, when his administration stopped looking like Barack Obama's and started looking like Jimmy Carter's, you could start with the failure of Build Back Better. Build Back Better was a sweeping agenda of economic reform on the scale of the New Deal, meant to solidify its author as the FDR-sized president he wanted to be. Dusting off the text now, you could feel the ambition. Across two bills, the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, it sought to spend over $4 trillion across a decade on transportation, manufacturing and science, home care, clean technology, an expanded child tax credit, tuition-free community college, childcare, and much more. It would have been an epochal expansion of government spending and ambition, on par with Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal or Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society. Little of this became law. Of course, the bipartisan infrastructure law enacted in 2021 included $250 billion in new transportation spending, less than half of the Jobs Plan's number. Even adding the $72 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act for electric vehicles doesn't close the gap much. While the Jobs Plan included $1.6 trillion in climate spending, the Inflation Reduction Act's climate measures are estimated cost less than half that much. The CHIPS and Science Act, passed in 2022, appropriated all of $79 billion to support manufacturing, a far cry from Biden's $590 billion bid, and largely didn't appropriate money for science at all. And then there's the American Families Plan, almost all of which fell by the wayside, not passed by Congress in any form. This is something that you guys need to understand. And the thing is, if you were here during this period, I told you all of this. And I said that when it failed, that was the end of Joe Biden's presidency, and he was going to lose the election. And I knew he was going to lose the election in 2021. That Biden was not able to pass the maximal version of his agenda is not much of an indictment. No president passes everything they want. They have to prioritize, to choose which parts of the agenda are worthy of their political capital and effort and which are not. Immigration activists were furious that Obama didn't prioritize comprehensive reform in his first term, and unions were mad that he didn't do the same for labor law. He put healthcare first. No, he didn't. Like, even this is too far to the right for me. The reality is Barack Obama set his healthcare bill to the Republicans and let them sit on it for 2 fucking years, and then passed it at the end with no Republican votes anyway. Whereas if he had just come into office and passed the bill quickly and on partisan lines, we could have moved on and passed 10 other fucking things. But in both cases, the president's allies in Congress made a conscious choice for good or ill. What stands out about Biden is the degree to which he simply refused to choose at all. From the design of the American Rescue Plan at the beginning of his term through Build Back Better and the rocky implementation of the measures he was able to pass, Biden's domestic record is characterized by a refusal to prioritize, a paralyzing fear of pissing off any Democratic faction that too often wound up winning nothing for any of them. Multiple causes, including his advanced age, conspired to make him the weakest chief executive America has had in decades. His advisors, a group of courtiers, which refers to the people that live at the court of a king. They're basically like the hangers-on of a king. They don't really do anything, but they're noble because of their relation to the king, right? Drawn heavily from his own family and longtime Senate aides, shared this distaste for infighting and were leery of offending the boss. The result is a failed presidency that left Biden without much of an enduring domestic legacy and made what accomplishments he can claim immensely vulnerable to the Republican trifecta taking over the government he led. It's a rather undignified end to the career of one of America's longest-serving statesmen. One would think a 44-year veteran of the Senate would do well precisely at the part of the presidency that demands strong leadership over the legislative process. And indeed, that was a major part of Biden's case for himself in 2020. But the legislative process that could have shepherded his agenda into law is exactly where Bidenism fell apart. You don't say. Biden's missteps began at the very beginning, with legislation sometimes built as a precursor and sometimes as a part of the Build Back Better, the American Rescue Plan. The $1.9 trillion bill, signed into law less than 2 months after Biden's inauguration, was in some ways a triumph. But it was a direct cause of the 2022 and 2023 inflation price hikes that in retrospect contributed to Donald Trump's eventual victory in 2024. That would have helped avoid a Trump comeback and possibly would have been better for workers. Inflation was high enough that the median worker saw incredibly weak wage growth. Certainly weaker than under Trump or Obama's second term. Okay, a more moderate stimulus would have done better? No. This is not why prices went up. This is actually incredibly stupid. Holy fucking hell, these liberals are irredeemably dumb. Okay. The just write a wish list and pass it through approach would not work for Build Back Better. Like the American Rescue Plan, Build Back Better was a less coherent agenda than a hodgepodge of different priorities than their own congressional champions. There was a child tax credit expansion for the American Rescue Plan. There was a universal pre-K, paid leave, and childcare. There were clean energy credits, and much more. None of them, in other words, were specifically Biden's signature issues because he didn't have an issue, because he didn't run a campaign. Like, well, of course he doesn't have any issues. What's he gonna do? I promise to make bankruptcy harder to get? Like, that's what he was doing in the Senate. There's a tendency among left-leaning observers to see Manchin and Sinema as hopelessly unpredictable because they were. They basically changed what they were saying as they went along. Because the more time they were given to masturbate around, the more they were able to change their positions from Manchin originally saying he would spend, $5 trillion or $3.5 trillion and then reducing it to $2 trillion. The longer they negotiated, the longer they sat there. Manchin was open to tax hikes on the rich, but skeptical of the child tax credit, while Sinema was opening to the programs, but hostile to tax hikes. It's almost like they blocked everything. Or could a more competent administration have passed a package that included something bigger and permanent for working families? More telling error in the meeting was something else. Each of you are saying do fewer things and do them bigger, yet you're all saying different things. And if you add up all your different things, it's actually a pretty big number. If you add up all this up, it's well over $2 trillion. The advice Biden was getting was good. Build Back Better was trying to do too much, and in so doing failed to do any one thing well or permanently. But his takeaway from this was that trying to do one thing well was a trap, because someone would be mad at him for not doing their thing permanently. I'm sorry, I'm skimming through this. But the thing is, I did not get my druthers, and neither did Joe Biden. Joe Manchin did. That's how the Senate, the basic arithmetic of getting to 50 works. I could not control who the people of West Virginia elect, but he could choose how to respond to the person they elected. And the $1.8 trillion plan was certainly better, and it did more for children than the Inflation Reduction Act would a year later. And somebody did choose. It was Joe Manchin. So in other words, Joe Biden's presidency is really Joe Manchin's presidency. I wonder if anybody made that kind of analysis. I wonder if there's a person out there who ever made that kind of analysis. What do you guys think? Because if they did, it would be pretty crazy. You see all the times I said Manchin. Trying to find it. But I basically said exactly that. All right, so Libby, I'll have to find it another time. Someone predicted they should be in the mainstream. Yeah, it's so true. As his legislative strategy, Biden's executive strategy was motivated by a desire to serve different ends: fighting climate change, fighting China, rebuilding U.S. manufacturing, helping unions, and so on. Yeah, given his climate goals, is Biden imposing tariffs on solar panels, not just ones from China, that effectively raise the price of clean energy and limit the Inflation Reduction Act's effectiveness? That's exactly Joe Biden in a nutshell. Joe Biden's in a nutshell is, I don't want to solve anything well. I want to make wasteful gestures in 15 different directions instead of doing what needs to be done to achieve a goal. Biden less won than he was given the nomination by party leaders eager to head off a Sanders nomination. And the party's voters supported that decision. They did not give him much of the authority that a nominee typically commands. Obama and Clinton won their nominations because they were once-in-a-generation political talents with supporters eager to back them up. Biden won after 2 failed presidential campaigns beforehand because the party was desperate to beat Trump and needed a moderate, any moderate. He came out of that process owing a lot of people a lot of favors. That led to an unusual decision to swing leftward in the general. And guess what? He won. The best gambit the Progressive Caucus had was a threat to vote against an infrastructure bill that Manchin wanted, but the gambit failed. Even if they had held the line, the likely outcome would have been neither an infrastructure bill nor Build Back Better. It was all pointless theater. So this is kind of the liberals in a nutshell. If progressives block things because it's not left-wing enough, that's pointless theater. But if right-wingers block things to get things to be moved to the right, then it's worthwhile. When Pelosi thought about the White House, she struggled to understand Biden's behavior. Revelations have mounted showing that Biden was much more cognitively compromised than I at least had previously believed. Oh, you don't say. The obvious Shakespearean reference for Biden is Lear, an aging and vain king who's losing his wits and tormented by his children. Sam Cedar said us, sorry we are libs. Oh, it's okay. Hey, Sam Cedarites. We were, wow. Wow, I'm sorry. Hey, Majority Reporters. I'm sorry for being so quiet there. I was, I'm trying to recall, I'm trying to remind myself exactly how correct we all were on Joe Biden and how cognitively unfit he was. Oh, here it is. The Joe Biden foreign policy address.
With China than we were when I took office. You all recall, many experts believe or predicting it was inevitable that China's economy would surpass ours. According to many predictions, that would happen by the year 2030 or shortly thereafter. But we in this room said no. If we make the investments in ourselves, we protect our workers and technologies, that will not happen. Now, according to the latest predictions, on China's current course, they will never surpass us, period. I met one-on-one with President Xi in consequential summits. He and I have always been direct and straightforward with each other. I made it clear we expect China and everyone to abide by the international rules, and so we stood up against unfair trade practices, taking action when China dumps subsidized goods, incredibly subsidized, on our markets to undercut our workers. We imposed target tariffs in critical sectors like cars, steel, and semiconductors, rather than across-the-board tariffs. We imposed historic export controls on investments, restrictions, to ensure that China cannot use the most advanced technology and sensitive data against us. And critically, we enlisted our allies and partners to join us, building.
Now, any reasonable measure of the Chinese economy has it already larger than the United States. The view of the American economy is still bigger than China rests mainly on using the unrefined dollar as the measure. But as all travelers know, a dollar in downtown Hanoi buys more than a dollar in New York City. In the same article we cite, The Economist itself points out that a basket of goods and services that costs $100 in America costs only $60 in China. A relative measure of the country wealth is based on purchasing power parity, and is widely believed to be more reliable as a measure of relative GDP before countries than simple dollar values. In the 2022, the IMF judged the Chinese economy in PPP terms to be 23% larger than America. And even the CIA considered it in favor of China at 16%. Finally, there is a third factor. It's likely to make a significant difference. Data suggests about 5%. Is the largely unmeasured informal economy between the two countries. No prizes for guessing which country is likely to gain the most from the addition of its informal economy. Making allowances for these three factors, World Economics estimates that the Chinese economy is approximately 52% larger than the United States as of today. So much for relative size. What about relative GDP growth? In the past, IMF data shows growth in China's economy over the past decade and the past 5 years and the past 3 years to have been consistently 2.5% to 3% higher in China than in the USA. And on another measure, China's share of global GDP growth over the past decade has been no less than 30.5%, as opposed to the United States' 9.1%. On these measures, even a significant slowdown in China's growth will be unlikely to lead to parity with U.S. GDP growth. It's just the idea that China isn't already a much larger economy is ridiculous.
More convergence among our allies on a shared approach to China than ever existed, and showing that it's more effective to deal with China alongside of partners rather than going it alone.
That's why that's why Biden wants to create all these alliances, because the U.S. can't defeat China alone. It can only encircle China.
But even while we compete vigorously, we've managed our relationship with China responsibly, so it's never tipped over into conflict. We've created lines of communication between President Xi and myself, and between the leaders of our militaries, to avoid misunderstanding. We found ways to work with each other, to address climate change, to reduce the flow of fentanyl in the United States, which, by the way, overdose deaths are coming down across our nation. And in my administration, we've seized more fentanyl at our border in 2 years than the previous 5 years combined. Today, I can also report to the American people, we're the first president in decades who's not leaving a war in Afghanistan to his successor. But we've got bin Laden during the Obama-Biden administration. The primary objective of war had been accomplished. And I believe that going forward, the primary threat of al-Qaeda would no longer be emanating from Afghanistan, but from elsewhere. And so we not need to station a sizable number of American forces in Afghanistan. So when I took office, I had a choice. Ultimately, I saw no reason to keep thousands of servicemen in Afghanistan. I think I have my schedule with me, and I keep on my, I don't have, but I keep on the back of my card the actual number of dead and wounded that occurred in our longest war, to remind myself. Keep spending hundreds of millions of dollars a day.
Guess he lost the card.
We're no longer doing that. In my view, it was time to end the war and bring our troops home, and we did.
For Biden, harsh judgment. Biden leaves office amid low assessments of his tenure. Just 5% of those surveyed said history would rate him as a great president. 21% said a good one. 27% a fair one. But 44%, a plurality, predicted he would be seen as a failed one. 5% great, 44% failed. The most frequent response when asked to name Biden's biggest achievement as president was undecided at 23%. About his biggest failure as president, 31% cited his handling of immigration and 20% the chaotic withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. People said that, Carter was one of the worst presidents that ever lived. It was proven later on that he really wasn't. He really was a good president. I think when people look back at history, they're going to determine that Biden was a good president for the time we had. As Trump's favorable, unfavorable ratings have improved over the last 4 years, Biden's have worsened. As he prepared to take office in 2020, Biden's rating was 49 to 39. He leaves office with a rating of 34 to 58, a net negative by 14 points. Voters narrowly supported by 50 to 44 another Trump promise to reduce military aid to Ukraine and press for a negotiated settlement with Russia. They were opposed 2-1 to the idea of privatizing the U.S. Postal Service. By 54 to 32%, those surveys said the country was on the wrong track and not headed in the right direction. That's gloomier than the already gloomy views Americans had 4 years ago and 8 years ago. Dissatisfaction with the status quo and a desire for change were seen as a major reason for Trump's victory. This is something that I talk about all the time. And I just want you to understand what I was saying. Republicans have a likely majority of the Supreme Court for a generation, are 1 seat away from Senate control, are likely to win the House in 2022 and still control the majority of state legislatures. This is actual reality. Democrats have 2 years to quickly change the structural reality of American politics, or they may not win the Senate for decades. It's that dire. Republicans currently have 53 senators. Biden is going to lose to Trump. If you support Biden's nomination by the Democratic Party, you are a Trump supporter. The people currently endorsing Biden should offer to resign from public life if he loses. I want to meet the advisors that are behind the push by the squad and Bernie to endorse Biden. The most out-of-touch decision they have made yet. If Biden wins, he'll betray them. He's an ideological conservative, and they have no leverage. Totally baffling. Lose-lose. He ran to the right as an extremist and didn't lose voters because he was the change candidate. Indiana went for Obama in 2008 when he was running as a progressive candidate of change. Like, that is what wins. He's a disruptor. That's why we elected him, said Cynthia Harrison, a Republican from Vermont. He's going to shake up Washington. Well, everybody, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. We'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern. Now that I see the genocide in Gaza is going to come to an end for now, liberals are now saying that leftists are allowing the genocide in Russia. Huh? Oh, yeah. Well, the best part is for liberals is when the genocide in Gaza ends, they're going to pretend like they were against it the entire time. And then they're immediately going to start saying, oh, but Russia is committing a genocide and you want peace? It's going to be a very interesting little pivot. Suddenly, they're all going to care about genocide again. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. We'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. All right, everybody. Stay safe out there. Solidarity forever. Free Palestine. And I hope they get the ceasefire deal done. All right, everybody. Peace.